Nandiyan naman talaga ako eh. Session resume. Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we now proceed with a reference of business and request that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the bills and resolutions on first reading, as well as communications and committee reports. So move.
The Secretary General is directed to do so.
Additional reference of business, bills on first reading. House Bill Number 8671, providing for a retirement law for judiciary officials conferred with the judicial rank, salary, and privileges. Representative Nunez Malañaon.
To the Committee on Justice.
House Bill Number 8672, providing for the regime of conjugal partnership of gains as the governing regime in the absence of a marriage settlement or when the regime agreed upon is void. Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Revision of Laws.
House Bill Number 8673, recognizing the capacity of the Filipino spouse to remarry when either spouse has obtained a foreign judicial decree of absolute divorce. Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Population and Family Relations.
House Bill Number 8674, amending the Family Code by removing and/or erasing classification between legitimate, illegitimate, and legitimated children. Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on the Revision of Laws.
House Bill Number 8675, granting hazard pay to all public prosecutors in the Philippines during their incumbency. Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Justice.
House Bill Number 8676, providing for the Magna Carta of Out-of-School Youth. Representative Abel Llanosa.
To the Committee on Youth and Sports Development.
House Bill Number 8677, declaring May 12 of every year as a special non-working public holiday in Cagayan de Oro City to be known as Cagayan de Oro Liberation Day. Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Local Government.
House Bill Number 8678, suspending for 1-year period the effectivity and implementation of the Child Safety in Motor Vehicles Act. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Transportation.
House Bill Number 8679, providing for a 5-day special emergency leave for all workers in public and private sector directly affected by natural calamities or disaster. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Civil Service and Professional Regulation and the Committee on Labor and Employment.
House Bill Number 8680, requiring all public telecommunication entities granted with congressional franchises to provide their subscribers with free access to government websites. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Information and Communications Technology.
House Bill Number 8681, integrating education on the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines in the grade 12 senior high school curricula of all public and private educational institutions. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Basic Education and Culture.
House Bill Number 8682, providing for tax exemptions and subsidies for the local music industry, amending certain sections of the Local Government Code of 1991. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Local Government.
House Bill Number 8683, providing measures to ensure pedestrian safety and convenience and providing penalties for violations thereof. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Transportation.
House Bill Number 8684, institutionalizing the Philippine National Games. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Youth and Sports Development.
Resolution. House Resolution 1575, directing the Committee on Higher and Technical Education to inquire on the tuition and miscellaneous fees of colleges and universities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Representative Rodriguez.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Resolution 1576, directing the appropriate committees of the House to inquire on the procedures, certificate of product registration to pharmaceutical products. Representative Pichay.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Resolution 1577, expressing profound sympathies and sincerest condolences of the House to the bereaved family of former Olongapo City Mayor James Bong Gordon Jr., representative of the 1st District of Zambales in the 10th, 11th, and 12th Congresses. Representative Tambunting.
To the Committee on Rules.
Communications. Letter dated January 13, 2021 of Cesar R. Dulay, Commissioner, BIR, submitting to the House a copy of the Bureau's Consolidated Monthly Report of the disbursement for the month of December 2020 and statement of approved budget utilization, disbursements, and balances for trust receipt for the quarter ending December 31, 2020.
To the Committee on Appropriations.
Letters and emails from several municipal mayors, city mayors, provincial governors, informing the House on their reports on fund utilization and status of programs, projects implementation on the Local Government Support Fund, conditional matching grant to cities and provinces for road repair, rehabilitation, and improvement for certain months of 2020.
To the Committee on Appropriations.
Letter dated 21 January 2021 of Benjamin E. Jokno, Governor of the BSP, submitting their report to Congress on the public sector foreign borrowings approved by the BSP for the fourth quarter of 2020 and the full year of 2020.
To the Committee on Banks and Financial Intermediaries.
Letter dated January 28, 2021 of Dr. Annabel V. Briones, Director, Industrial Technology Development Institute, DOST, submitting to the House a copy of their quarterly financial reports and physical accomplishments.
To the Committee on Appropriations.
Letter dated 29 January 2021 of Jerry B. Jabela, Acting Director 3, Finance Management and Administrative Service, Tariff Commission, informing the House that their financial accountability report and physical report of operations for the fourth quarter have been posted in their website.
To the Committee on Appropriations.
Letter dated January 29, 2021 of Jose Miguel R. De La Rosa, Undersecretary, Corporate Affairs Group, NEDA, informing the House that their physical report of operations or budget accountability report as of December 31, 2020 has been submitted through the DBM's Unified Reporting System and uploaded in their agency's Transparency Seal webpage on January 29, 2021.
To the Committee on Appropriations.
Letter dated 9 February 2021 of Janice G. Aizon-Zales, Deputy Director, Office of the General Counsel and Legal Services, BSP, transmitting to the House a duly certified copy of Circular Number 1109, dated 4 February 2021.
To the Committee on Banks and Financial Intermediaries.
Report dated February 11, 2021 of Honorable Mendoza, Secretary General, House of Representatives, on enrolled House Bills Number 1531, 5740, 5741, 5742, 5743, and 5872, which were transmitted to the Office of the President for His Excellency's consideration and signature. Committee reports. Report number 748 of the Committee on Trade and Industry and Appropriations on House Bill number 8698, report numbers 749 to 751 of the Committees on Higher Technical Education and Appropriation on House Bill numbers 8726, 8728, and 8729. Report number 752 of the Committee on Natural Resources and Appropriations on House Bill number 8731.
To the Committee on Rules. Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, with leave of the House, I move that we open privilege hour.
Any objection? Hearing none, the privilege hour is now open.
First to avail is the Honorable Lady from Kabataan Party List. I move that she be recognized, Congresswoman Sarah Jane Elago.
The Honorable Elago is hereby recognized. Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, since the Honorable Elago is not yet on board, I move instead that we recognize the Honorable Franz Castro from ACT Teachers Party List for her privilege speech. So move.
The Honorable Franz Castro of the ACT Teachers Party List is hereby recognized.
Magandang araw, Madam Speaker at sa mga kapwa ko kinatawan. Halos 4 na buwan na lamang ang natitira sa school year 2020-2021. Ngunit wala pa ring malinaw at konkretong plano ang Department of Education at ang ating gobyerno kung paano na naman maitatawid ang susunod na school year na hindi nakokompromiso ang karapatan sa edukasyon at ang kalidad nito kahit tayo ay nasa gitna pa rin ng pandemya. Batay sa inilabas na COVID-19 vaccination plan ng gobyerno, wala sa prioridad ang mga guro. Ang mga guro at social workers ay kabilang lamang sa B1 o pang-anim sa prioridad ng gobyerno na bibigyan ng bakuna. Paano na lamang ang ligtas na pagbabalik eskwela ng mga mag-aaral kung kahit sa bakuna ay hindi prioridad ang kanilang mga guro at hindi maipapatupad sa mga paaralan ang kailangang pasilidad para sa kaligtasan at mayroong minimum health standards. Maituturing na education frontliners ang mga guro dahil kahit naman may pandemya ay patuloy pa rin ang serbisyo nito sa ating mga kabataan. Ang masakit na katotohanan ay napag-iwanan na ang mga guro sa usaping sahod, benepisyo, karapatan, pati ba naman ang pagbabakuna ay wala pa ring aasahan ang mga ito sa ating gobyerno. Nauna pang mabakunahan ang mga military and uniform personnel na dinoble ang sahod kasama sa top 5 priority ng vaccination plan. Idagdag pa ang VIP vaccination ng PSG at membro ng gabinete. Ngayong nagsisimula ng maging accessible ang COVID-19 vaccines, kailangan siguruhin ng gobyerno na lahat na nangangailangan nito ay makakakuha at may sapat na alokasyon o supply ng bakuna at mahalaga rin na nakabatay ito sa standards ng World Health Organization. Madam Speaker, ayon sa World Health Organization Roadmap for prioritizing COVID-19 vaccines para sa stage 3 o yung moderate vaccine availability for 21 to 50% national population, ito po ang prioridad. Una, older adults defined by age-based risk specific to country or region. Specific age cut-off to be decided at the country level. Second, age groups at high risk of transmitting infection by age-based risk specific to country or region. Specific age cut-off to be decided by the country level. Pangatlo po, Madam Speaker, primary and secondary school teachers and staff. So dito po sa World Health Organization po, pangatlo po sa prioridad ang mga guro at ang mga education staff. At ang pang-apat, other essential workers outside health and education sectors. Halimbawa po, Madam Speaker, mga police, municipal services, child care providers, agriculture, and food workers, transportation workers, government workers, essential to critical functioning of the state, not covered by other categories. Kahit sa World Health Organization standards, kasama ang mga guro at education support personnel sa mga dapat prioridad ng bakuna. Kailangan na po ito, ang bakuna sa ating mga guro at education support personnel para magkaroon na ng ligtas na pagbubukas ng paaralan at makabalik na sa mas epektibong paraan ng pagtuturo, ito po yung face-to-face class. Bilang kinatawan ng mga guro at lumalaban para sa karapatan sa edukasyon, nananawagan kami sa Administrasyong Duterte na ensure ng ating mga education frontliners tulad ng mga guro at education support personnel ay maging prioridad sa ating vaccination plan. Kung lalong tatagal ang pagsasara ng paaralan at walang face-to-face classes, mas lalong malulugmok sa krisis ang ating edukasyon. Lalong tataas ang bilang ng mga dropouts at out-of-school youths dahil hindi lahat ay kayang sumabay sa blended learning. Mas nalilimitahan ang access sa quality education na nagreresulta sa kapabayaan ng gobyerno na masiguro na ang karapatan sa edukasyon ay matatamasa ng lahat. Hindi na dapat dinadagdagan ng gobyerno ang kapabayaan nila mula sa pagkontrol ng COVID, contact tracing, testing hanggang sa pagbabakuna. Isa sa mga hakbang para magkaroon ng equal access sa kalidad na edukasyon ay ang pagbibigay ng prioridad ng ating gobyerno sa mga guro at education support personnel sa vaccination plan maliban sa paglalaan ng sapat na pasilidad tulad ng hand washing o sanitation, pagpapababa ng class size, paglalaan ng sapat na pondo, gadgets, modules at iba pang mga pangangailangan. Ito lang po, Madam Speaker, at muli, Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat.
Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that the speech of Representative Castro be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Referred to the Committee on Rules.
Mr.
Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, the next member who wishes to avail of the privilege is Representative Sara Elago of Party List Kabataan. I move that she be recognized.
Representative Sara Elago of Kabataan Party List is hereby recognized. Please proceed, Honorable Elago.
Salamat, Madam Speaker. Higit isang taon na ang nakalipas mula nang maitalaking sa bansa. Higit kalahating milyon Pilipinas sa COVID-19 mortality rate sa rehiyon ng ASEAN. Lubhang naging matindi ang naging epekto ng pandemya sa ekonomiya, mga negosyo, malawakang kawalan ng trabaho at kabuhayan. At gayon din ang edukasyon ng mga kabataan. Napalala pa ang mga epekto ng pandemya ang kawalan ng komprehensibong plano upang mainam na matugunan ang pandemya at ang epekto nito sa kabuhayan ng mamamayan. Talat pa sa ayuda at kulang na kulang pa rin ang kinakailangan na pagpapalakas ng ating serbisyong medikal. Ang ilan sa mga palisiya pa nga ay kaysa makatulong ay lalo pa pong nakakapagpahirap sa kasalukuyang kalagayan ng ating mamamayan. Ngayon, Madam Speaker, sa taong 2022, tayo na naman po ay bibigyan ng pagkakataon na makapamili ng mga susunod na lider ng ating bansa. Ngayon, higit kailanman, nangangailangan ng aktibong partisipasyon ng mga kabataan at mamamayan sa gitna ng public health emergency. Ngayon din, ang kinakailangan na pagpapalakas ng mga programa at kampanya para sa mas pinalakas ng mga recovery plan. Ang representasyon po na ito ng kabataan ay nananawagan sa lahat ng mga kabataan, lalong-lalo na po yung mag-iedad ng 18 na magparehistro para makaboto sa 2023 upang lalong mapalakas ang ating boses pagdating sa mga pampublikong proseso at pag-impluwensya sa desisyon ng ating mga lider na magtataguyod sa kapakanan ng mamamayan. Napakahalaga ang magparehistro at makaboto upang demokratikong mapabilang ang ating boses sa pagpili ng mga susunod ng mga pampublikong opisyal na siyang pinagkakatiwalaan ng kapangyarihan at mga pampublikong pondo upang mamuno sa paglilingkod at proteksyon sa kapakanan ng mamamayan. Ang pagpaparehistro ang unang hakbang para sa karapatan sa pagboto. Ito ang huhubog sa kalagayan at kapakanan ng sambayanan, hindi lang sa kasalukuyan, kundi sa mamanahin natin kinabukasan. Itong unang linggo ng Enero, iniulat ng Commission on Elections na bagamat tumataas ang bilang ng mga nagpaparehistro, mabagal pa ang pagdami nito kaysa sa kanilang inaasahan. At sa target na 4 na milyon na mga bagong registered voters bago ang September 30 na deadline ngayong taon. Kaya nararapat lamang na palakasin natin ang ating kampanya at advokasya para sa voters registration at education sa buong bansa. Ngayong buwan din ng Pebrero, binuksan rin ang pagpaparehistro hanggang buong araw ng Sabado. Pinahaba rin, Madam Speaker, ng 2 oras kada araw mula Martes hanggang Sabado mula alas 8 ng umaga hanggang alas 5 ng hapon ang oras na bukas ang pagpaparehistro. Sang-ayon sa Commission on Elections, mayroong 4 na opsyon upang magparehistro upang mapataas pa rin ang pakikilahok sa voters registration, education campaign, kahit pa tayo ay nasa gitna ng pandemya. Una ay ang pagpunta sa Office of the Election Officer o OEO sa lugar kung saan magpaparehistro, pagkuha ng form at sasagutin ito, ang lahat ng hinihinging informasyon at pagsusumiti sa OEO. Pangalawa ay ang pag-download at accomplish ng form sa sulat kamay bago magpunta sa OEO. Pangatlo ay ang pag-download at accomplish ng form sa PDF reader, digital na Madam Speaker bago ang mismong printing na to at pagpunta sa OEO. At ang pang-apat ay ang paggamit ng irehistro na web application. Huwag kakalimutan para doon sa mga magpaparehistro na magpadala o magdala ng valid ID, na may current address, birth certificate at mga photocopies nito. Mainam na magdala ng higit isang valid ID. Bisitahin rin ang COMELEC website sa iregistro.comelec.gov.ph at mga social media pages para sa higit pang impormasyon at mga pinakahuling balita tungkol sa voters registration. Hinihikayat natin ang lahat ng mga organisasyon ng mga kabataan, konseho ng mga mag-aaral, sangguniang kabataan na magkaroon ng iba't ibang inisyatiba at maging mapanlikha upang mas madami pang kabataan ang lumahok at magparehistro. Tipunin din natin ang boses ng mga kabataan hinggil sa kanilang mga pagtingin sa mga napapanahong issue at kung paano pa mas makakatulong pa sa ating mga komunidad. Diinan din natin ang kahalagahan ng pagboto sa pamamagitan ng paglulunsad ng mga voters education at voters empowerment campaign. Pinagpupugayan din natin ang lahat ng mga meron ng inisyatiba online at offline para sa voters registration, education at empowerment. Kasalukuyan, inaanyayahan din natin ang mga kabataan na lumahok sa mga usapin sa mga komunidad at pambansa. Irehistro natin ang ating boses para sa mas pinalakas na sistema ng kalusugan, tuloy-tuloy na ayuda, malinaw at may pananagutan na tugon sa pandemya at COVID-19 immunization program, ligtas na muling pagbubukas ng mga paaralan, mas mataas na pondo para sa agrikultura at micro, small at medium enterprises at para sa pagpapalakas ng pambansang ekonomiya tungo sa sama-samang pagbangon at sama-samang pagulad. Tumindig tayo laban sa paghihimasok ng mga dayuhan sa ating karagatan at kayaman. Tumindig tayo para sa academic freedom at human rights. Tayo ay pagbabago, tayo ay pag-asa ng bayan tungo sa mas magandang bukas para sa mga susunod pa na henerasyon. Itiyakin natin na ang lahat ng ito ay nagkakaisa nating gagawin ng buong tatag, ng may buong pagsisikap, ng buong husay, may buong pagiging mapanlikha at ng punong-puno ng pag-asa para sa kinabukasan ng tayo. Kaya kabataan, gumawa tayo ng kasaysayan, #magparehistro ka na, #boto mo bukas natin, your voice matters, our voice matters, at itiyakin po. At nananawagan tayo sa ating mga kasamahan dito sa Kongreso na palakasin pa ang panawagan, sumama sa lahat ng nananawagan na magpa-register upang makaboto habang tinitiyak natin ang kalusugan ng bawat isa sa gitna ng pandemya. Maraming salamat po at kayong ko. Maraming salamat, Madam Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that the speech of Representative Elago be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Is there an objection? Hearing none, referred to the Committee on Rules.
Madam Speaker, the next to avail of the privilege is Representative Euphemia Kafemia Kulyamat of Party List Bayan Muna. I move that she be recognized.
Representative Kulyamat is hereby recognized.
Maraming salamat, Madam
Interpellation.
Speaker. Madam Speaker, palagi naming ipinapanawagan na irespeto ang karapatan sa mga lumad. Madam Speaker, mga kapwa kong mambabatas, ako ay nagsasalita ngayon upang ipaalam sa inyo ang kalagayan na naman ng mga lumad. Kahapon lang ay dumanas na naman ng matinding atake ang mga katutubong bakwit. Kahapon lang, sa tabing ng bugos at violenting rescue operations, persahang pinasok ng mga kapulisan ang Lumad Bakwit School sa Talamban, Cebu, kung saan nakasangtuaryo ang 42 lumad na napilitang lumikas sa kanilang mga komunidad dahil sa militarisasyon. Ilusob at binulabog ang tahimik na sangtuaryo ng mga bakwit. Violente at persahang kinuha ang 25 katao, mga estudyante, 2 guro at 2 dato. Kitang-kita sa mga video ng Save Our Schools Networks ang dahas na ginamit ng mga pulis sa mga estudyante at guro. Rinig ang iyak at sigaw ng mga kabataan. Ito ba ang sinabi nilang rescue operation? Ang mambugbog at maghasi-hasik ng takot sa mga kabataan, katutubo. Madam Speaker, hindi ito ang unang pagkakataon na tinangka ang mga Peking rescue operation. Noong 2015 ay ginawa na rin ito sa lokal na opisyalis kasama ang kapulisan. Nagpumilit pumasok sa UCC Piharan sa Davao. 18 lumad ang sugatan. Noong Enero 2020, ulit ay pirsahang pinasok ng grupong paramilitar na Alamara ang parehong lugar. Tinira ng paramilitar ang bakod ng sanktuaryo gamit ang mga bulo habang walang ginawa ang kapulisan sa karahasang naganap. Ngunit parehong bigo ang mga Peking rescue na ito. Madam Speaker, para sa mga hindi pamilyar, mula 2014 ay nakabakwit ang mahigit 500 lumad mula sa kanilang mga komunidad sa Talaingod at Kapalong sa Davao, dulot sa tumitinding presensya ng militar at paramilitar sa mga lupang ninuno na hitik sa minerales at likas yaman. Madam Speaker, hindi na kontento sa pagpapalaya sa aming mga tahanan, inasara ang aming mga paaralan. Sa ilalim ng kasalukuyang administrasyon, 136 na paaralang lumad ang persahang pinasara. Kaya't nagdesisyon ang mga komunidad na ilungsad ang Backwit School para bigyang espasyo ang mga katutubong kabataan na ipagpatuloy ang kanilang pag-aaral at ipaalam sa mas marami ang tunay na kalagayan ng mga lumad. Ang tanong namin, Madam Speaker, paano naging rescue operation ang pagbulabog ng sanktuaryo at pirsahang pag-aristo ng mga bakwit? Paano magsasagawa ang mga pulis at militar ng rescue na sa mga lumad kung sila mismo at ang dahas na dulot nila ang rason kung bakit pirsahang nagbakwit ang mga katutubo? Pinapaalala lang namin, kami ay binantaan na bubumbahan ang aming mga paaralan. Pinatay ang aming mga leader at guro. Sinunog at pinadimulis ang aming mga paaralan. Pinapaulanan ng bomba at bala ang aming mga komunidad. Ngayon, nais nyo kami i-rescue? Ang armadong pwersa ng Estado mismo ang panganib ng mga katutubo. Madam Speaker, kaming mga katutubong lumad ay may sariling pag-iisip at panindigan. Nakapagtayo kami ng sarili naming paaralan para sa aming mga kabataan nung hindi ito mabigay ng pamahalaan. Hindi namin kailangan ang pwersa at Peking rescue. Ang kailangan namin ay pagpigil ng militarisasyon sa mga lupang ninuno at pagrespeto sa aming karapatan sa sariling pagpapasya. Madam Speaker, mariing naming kinukondina ang ataking naganap sa Backwit School sa Cebu, Madam Speaker, at nanawagan kami sa lahat ng mamamayan at sa inyo, mga kapwa kong mambabatas, na tumindig kasama ang mga lumad. Madam Speaker, patuloy namin isigaw ang aming panawagan, palayain ang lumad 25, palayain ang Backwit School Cebu, itigil ang atake sa mga katutubo at pambansang minorya. Madam Speaker, ito lang po. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon ulit sa ating lahat.
Majority Leader.
Madam Speaker, Representative Franz Castro of ACT Teachers Party List who wishes to interpellate Representative Kulyamat, I move that she be recognized.
Representative Castro is hereby recognized. Representative Castro? Okay, please proceed, Representative Castro.
Madam Speaker, narinig po ba ako, Madam Speaker?
Yes, please proceed.
Maraming salamat, Madam Speaker. Salamat sa privilege speech ni Representative Kulyamat. Kami po kahapon tayo po kahapon, kung maalala ninyo, katanghalian, umaga, nagdaos po tayo ng parang consultation sa mga schools na red tag, in-identify as bed daw ng mga NPA or recruitment area ng mga NPA. So natatandaan niyo po ba ito, Congresswoman Kulyamat, kahapon?
Opo, andun din po ako.
Oo, at kahapon nga nagkaroon tayo ng resolution noong karamihan po sa representatives na umattend doon sa ginawa po nating consultation kaugnay noong pangunahin dito yung UP at yung pang mga SUC, ang SEAP, ang COCOPEA at iba pang mga private schools na naugnay doon sa tinatawag na red tagging at recruitment daw ng NPA. At nagkaroon ng resolution na sana magkaroon ng ng dialogue dahil nakita natin yung academic freedom ay nasasagkaan dito sa ginagawang mga red tagging. At nabigla nga tayo at pagkatapos nito nagkaroon ng ganito sa University of San Carlos sa Cebu City. Meron pa man din tayong recommendations na dialogue with the PNP to be facilitated by CHR and other related government agencies para yung mga eskwelahan, lalong-lalo na po sa mga colleges and universities at sa mga isama na natin yung mga high schools ay maging institusyon for academic freedom at siyempre maging institusyon para sa pagpapaunlad ng kaalaman ng ating mga estudyante. So, maaari po bang maipalawanag, Representative Kulyamat, ano po ba ibig sabihin ng backwit school? Bakit po ba nagkaroon ng backwit school?
Maraming salamat, Kung Franz. Tulad na nga ng sinabi ko kanina, kami na mga katutubo ay mapayapa kami sa aming mga komunidad at malaya naming naitayo ang aming mga paaralan. Ngunit dahil sa matinding militarisasyon at hindi ginalang ang aming karapatan sa sariling pagpapasya, kung paano namin papaunlarin ang aming komunidad batay sa aming sariling kultura, militarisa ang aming komunidad. Kadalas ang karamihan sa aming mga kalalakihan ay binubugbog, tapos mayroong mga dinukot, may mga pinatay. Kaya sa pilitang kaming nagbakwit, lalo na yung mga katutubo sa Talaingod, na kung saan nagkaroon ng bakwit na mula 2014 hanggang sa kasalukuyan ay hindi sila nakabalik sa kanilang mga komunidad. Kaya yun yung napagpasyahan na kailangan humingi ng tulong sa mga universidad dito sa kasyudaran para naman may pagpatuloy ang karapatan sa mga kabataan para sa edukasyon.
Ilan po sa mga nabisita ng kinatawang ito, Madam Speaker, kung ito po ay mga backwit school, ay yung dito sa UP at doon sa Davao City, sa Haran. Ito po ba ay ma-consider ninyong mga backwit school, Madam Speaker, Representative Kulyamat?
Oo po. ito po yung mga backward school natin. Merong sa Haran, merong sa Cebu, at mayroon din dito sa UP Diliman, dito sa...
Okay. Sa nangyari po dun sa San Carlos University na may nabasa po kung joint statement no ng church at saka ng eskwelahan doon, dahil lumalabas po doon sa report na sinabi ng mga pulis ay ito po raw ay rescue operation. Tama po ba ito mula doon sa ating sources? Lalong-lalo na doon sa Save Our Schools movement, ito ba ay rescue? Bakit magkakaroon ng rescue samantalang ilang ano na po sila doon, ano? Alam ko po, mga ilang buwan na po sila doon na nagkakaroon ng pag-aaral, literacy, numeracy doon sa eskwelahan na yon dahil pinupkop po sila ng University of San Carlos. Ano po ba talaga yung tunay na nangyari? Rescue po ba ito? Or talagang harassment at marami ring mga paglabag na ginawa? Madam Speaker, Representative Tulyamat.
Madam Speaker, hindi ko po yan matatawag na rescue. No? Dahil ang dahilan nga kung bakit kami ay nakabakwit, dahil sa pandarahas ng mga militar at paramilitar sa aming mga komunidad, at walang rason na sila din ang magre-rescue sa amin. At hindi po natin yan matatawag na rescue dahil malaya naman, no? Desisyon yan ng buong komunidad na pumunta ang mga bata doon sa syudad upang, yun nga sinabi natin, upang makapagpatuloy sila sa kanilang pag-aaral. At batay sa sinabi ng Save Our Schools Networks, ang mga kabataan na galing sa mga komunidad ay meron talaga silang consent galing sa kanilang mga magulang at walang rason na mag-rescue operation ang mga kapulisan dahil wala namang nangyaring problema. Malinaw nga ang kanilang sanctuaryo doon sa San Carlos University. Kaya hindi natin matawag na rescue operation ang ginagawa, kundi patuloy na pandarahas at pananakot sa mga katutubo. Dahil ayaw ng gobyerno na maedukar ang mga katutubo dahil ang panindigan nga namin na mga katutubo ay dipinsahan ang lupang ninuno para sa kinabukasan ng susunod na salinlahi. Kaya nga mariing natin kinukundina itong sinasabing rescue operation dahil wala pong dahilan kung bakit i-rescue ang mga kabataan doon sa San Carlos University.
Okay. So, malinaw po kahit na, salamat po Representative Tulyamat, Madam Speaker. Malinaw po kahit sa nakita ko pong mga video, talagang harassment, sapilitan, sumisigaw, umiiyak nga yung mga kabataan na nakita natin doon sa mga nakita natin sa social media na video. So, ibig sabihin, ito ay hindi nagpaalam doon sa eskwelahan. Basta lang pumasok ang mga kapulisan at ahente ng gobyerno para sila ay kuhanin. Tama po ba to, Representative Tulyamat, Madam Speaker? Nagkaroon po ba ng permiso?
Pakiulit. Sorry.
Nagkaroon po ba, Madam Speaker, nagkaroon po ba ng permiso sa eskwelahan na meron silang aarestuhin, kukuhanin, i-rescue daw ng mga kabataan? Nagpaalam po ba sa eskwelahan?
Ginong Speaker, batay sa ating nalaman na hindi po alam, hindi nagpaalam sa mga mga opisyalis sa naturang eskwelahan ang pagpasok, ang mga pulis na pumasok sa sanctuaryo.
So, okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Tulyamat, so hindi po nakapagpaalam, hindi. Meron din po bang arrest warrant? Kasi sinasabi din ni Esperon, General Esperon, na meron daw arrest warrant. Totoo po ba ito?
Hindi po tayo maniniwala na mayroong arrest warrant dahil hindi naman mga kriminal yung mga bata. wala namang mga krimi na ginagawa nila na karapat-dapat silang isyuhan ng warrant. Kaya hindi tayo maniniwala na ang ginawa na pagpasok ng mga pulis doon sa sanktuaryo ay mayroong mga warrant. Wala po talaga. Ito talaga yung paniniwala ng representasyon ito na talagang hindi bagay na magsabi sila na nag-serve ng warrant dahil hindi talaga karapat-dapat na isyuhan ng warrant ang mga batang yan dahil nagsisikap lang nga sila, humahanap sila kung saan sila payapang makapag-aral para sa kanilang kinabukasan. Kaya nagpapasalamat nga kami sa mga universidad na kahit na sa ganitong kalagayan ay tinatanggap ang mga bata doon sa kanilang sanktuaryo dahil nga po sa napakahalaga talaga ng pangarap ng mga bata na makapag-aral. Kasi kahit naman tayo, sabi nga natin na ang pag-aaral ay susi ng pag-unlad ng buhay. Kaya ang lahat ng sinasabi din natin na ang edukasyon ay hindi po yan pribilehiyo. Karapatan po yan ng bawat isa na kailangan natin igalang.
Okay. Thank you po, Mr. Speaker, Representative Kulyamat. Isa rin po sa na propaganda ng mga militar o ng pulis ay tinuturuan daw po ito ng kung ano-anong mga pang-terorista, kung ano-ano pong mga tungkol sa NPA. Totoo po ba ito?
Hindi talaga totoo yan, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Ginoong Speaker, hindi po yan totoo. Dahil sinasabi ko na nga palagi kong sinasabi na nang nagsimula ang pagtayo ng aming paaralan, maganda ang ugnayan namin sa DepEd. Binigyan kami ng slot ng exam pagkatapos ng high school doon sa Alcadev at sa ibang mga paaralan, bigyan kami ng slot para magkaroon ng E&A exam para makapagpatuloy sa kolehiyo. At sa awa ng Diyos, Ginoong Speaker, ang aming mga estudyante, pagdating sa resulta ng exam, ay 100% ang passing ng aming mga estudyante. Yun ba ang tinuturuan ng ideolohiya ng NPA? Na pag mag-exam sa public school ay makakapasa sila? Kaya malinaw na paratang lamang sa amin upang takutin kami at patahimikin at tumigil sa aming panindigan na depensahan ang aming lupang ninuno. Dahil ito lang yung inaasahan namin para sa kinabukasan ng ating mga kabataan. At sa tingin ko din, dahil ito ay kalikasan, hindi lang katutubo ang maiipektuhan pag ang ating kalikasan ay masisira. Makikita nga natin, Ginoong Speaker, dahil sa pagkasira ng ating kalikasan, napakalakas ng bagyo, napakalakas ng lindol, malalakas na ulan, malalakas na baha, na ito ay dulot ng pagkasira ng ating kalikasan. At ang pangunahing maiipektuhan ay ang ating mga kapatid dito sa baba tulad ng nangyari sa Cagayan Valley, yung mga lugar kung saan binaha nung nakaraang mga buwan. At yun nga yung sinasabi namin na mahalagang-mahalaga ang aming tungkulin na taas noon naming isasabihin na mahalagang-mahalaga ang aming tungkulin sa pagdepensa sa ating lupang ninuno na ito ay ang ating inang kalikasan kung saan ang lahat ng buhay natin ay doon nakasalalay sa lupa. Kaya para sa amin bilang mga katutubo na ang aming pagsisikap doon sa aming mga komunidad na mapaunlad namin ang aming sariling sistema ng ekonomiya at ng aming kultura, sinisikap namin yan dahil karapatan naming ilipat sa aming susunod na henerasyon kung ano man ang aming mga kultura dahil ayaw natin itong mabura sa kasaysayan. Dahil naniniwala kami na ito ang tunay na kultura ng mamamayang Pilipino na kung saan sa mahabang kasaysayan kinakalimutan natin ito, ngunit ito ang pinakamahalaga para sa ating na mga mamamayang Pilipino.
Maraming salamat, Madam Speaker. Bilang panghuli po, isa po doon sa mga inaresto dito ay yung volunteer teacher na si Teacher Chad na graduate po ng UP. Siya po na inilaan niya po yung kanyang ilang panahon pagka-graduate niya para mag-volunteer teacher para sa ating mga lumad students. At wala pong arrest warrant, wala pong kaso na inano at kinuha po at kasama siya sa mga kinulong. So ito po ay kinukundina ng ACT Teachers Party List at nananawagan po tayo na i-release yung mga i-release si Teacher Chad, yung dalawang datu at syempre po at sana makabalik na sa pag-aaral yung ating mga estudyante. Maraming salamat, Madam Speaker. Maraming salamat, Representative Kulyamat.
Maraming salamat, Kong Franz. Maraming salamat, Ginong Speaker. Ang panghuling ko po, si Sir Chad Buok po ay hinalulungkot din po namin ang paghuli sa kanya dahil siya ang isang guro doon sa aming mga komunidad na kung saan nagbibigay ng katalinuhan sa aming mga anak. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Speaker, at magandang hapon ulit sa ating lahat.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the speech of Representative Kulyamat as well as the interpellations thereon be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Hearing no objection, the motion is approved.
Mr. Speaker, the next of our colleagues to avail of the privilege is the gentleman from the 3rd District of Camarines Sur. I move that he recognize Representative Gabriel Bordado Jr.
Representative Gabriel Bordado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Magbibigay lang po ako ng isang napaka-ikling manifestation. Lumabas po ngayong araw na ito ang isang report na nagsasabi po na ang Supreme Court Mr. Speaker, naririnig po ba ako dyan?
Please go ahead.
Okay po. May lumabas pong isang report sa GMA News Online na nagsasabi, and let me quote it, Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court, sitting as the Presidential Electoral Tribunal, today dismissed the election protest filed by former Senator Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos against Vice President Leni Robredo over the results of the 2016 race. Supreme Court spokesperson Brian Hosaka told reporters that the court unanimously voted to junk the protests nearly 5 years after it was filed by Marcos on June 29th, 2016, unquote. Mr. Speaker, isang napakagandang balita po ito para sa amin, lalong-lalo na po rito sa 3rd District ng Camarines Sur, na kung saan po nagsimula ang ating Vice President Leni Robredo. Sa simula pa po talaga ng kaso pong ito, nandun na ang aming pananalig na anuman ang mangyari, ang katotohanan po ang siyang mananaig. So, I do hope that this will give the people of the Philippines a chance and the hope na sa darating ng mga araw ay magkakaroon po tayo ng magandang future. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Maraming salamat po.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the speech of Representative Bordado be referred to the Committee on Rules.
No objection. The speech of the Honorable Bordado referred to the Committee on Rules. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, since we have no more members who have manifested their intent to avail of the privilege R, I move that we terminate the same.
No objection. Hearing none. Privilege hour is terminated. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that we resume consideration on House Bill number 7814 as contained in Committee Report number 550, and that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the measure.
Is there any objection? Hearing none. Motion is approved. Secretary General is directed to read the title of House Bill 7814.
House Bill 7814, an act strengthening drug prevention and control, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 9165, as amended, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary status is that we are still in the period of sponsorship and debate. To resume his sponsorship of the measure, I move that we recognize the distinguished chairperson of the Committee on Dangerous Drugs, Representative Robert S. Barbers, and to interpolate our sponsor, I move that we also recognize the gentleman from the 2nd District of Cagayan de Oro, Deputy Speaker Rufus Rodriguez.
The Honorable Ace Barbers is recognized for his interpellation.
Mr. Speaker,
The Honorable Rodriguez may proceed now for his interpellation.
thank you very much and good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and our distinguished chairperson of the Dangerous Drugs Committee, the Honorable Sponsor, Ace Barbers. Good afternoon. May I ask our distinguished sponsor whether he will be amenable to some interventions by this representation?
Gladly, Mr. Speaker, coming from a legal luminary and an esteemed member of this 18th Congress, together with the sitting Speaker at the moment, Deputy Speaker Marcoleta, this representation would gladly entertain any interpellation from the distinguished gentleman from Cagayan de Oro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and distinguished sponsor. My distinguished sponsor, who is my fellow Mindanaonon. So I have just 2 points, Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor. The first point is I had a bill which would remove from the dangerous drugs law the requirement that the press media will be required to attend these drug apprehensions and confiscations, and likewise require them to appear in court because they are compulsory witnesses to these investigations. We know, Mr. Chairman, distinguished sponsor, whether that is now incorporated in this bill strengthening the Dangerous Drugs Act.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague from Cagayan de Oro. The proposal of the gentleman was widely applauded, lauded, and accepted by the members of the committee when he introduced the said amendment. After stating the reason why members of the media must not be included in this section as witnesses, we found it to be logical and approved the same immediately, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
May I know the provisions in the proposed bill strengthening the dangerous drugs law on this matter, Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, under Section 21, of the proposed bill, we deleted the in number 1, last paragraph, members of the media may be invited to join, cover anti-drug operations of the government for journalism purposes only. And we intended to state this in this section, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, because they should not be made witnesses in the apprehension of drug suspects, because it may put their lives in danger. That's why we stated here clearly that their presence, they could be invited only for journalism purposes only, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Thank you very much, distinguished sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for that amendment to the dangerous drugs law. Mr. Speaker and distinguished chair, this representation had to file this bill upon the request of the KBP, Cagayan de Oro, Misamis Oriental Chapter, because what is happening in our city is that our few press people from media, print and radio and broadcast, instead of reporting new occurrences of important events, they are now in court waiting. And you know, the docket of the court every day has 20 to 25 cases. And that is why instead of doing their job, they are now, they're in court almost every other day, and for the week they are called because there are many drug cases. And so what happens, Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor, is that they're not able to anymore exercise their profession as members of media. And that is why that was requested. And another point is that if they fail after, because they were compulsorily required under the old law, under the present law, and so since they are the witnesses, then automatically they will be subpoenaed by the courts. And the courts, therefore, if they're absent, they will be issued a bench warrant for their arrest. So we are having this kind of problems not only in our city, but the KBP national organization likewise wrote to this representation, and therefore we thank the distinguished sponsor for being able to accept this particular provision in our dangerous drugs law bill. So thank you for that, Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor. Now I go to my last point. Mr. Sponsor, you've stated that in this strengthening bill, amending the revised dangerous drugs law, there is the provision on the penalty of life imprisonment to that. Is that correct, distinguished sponsor?
Mr. Speaker, the Republic Act 9165, or the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, stated the penalty under its penal provisions that those who violated any provision of the said act will be punishable by either life imprisonment to death. But in some of the provisions under the old law, it did not spell out that the crime is punishable by life imprisonment or death. So the committee found it perhaps logical as well in order to avoid the vagueness in the interpretation, we spelled out the penal provision or the penalty of life imprisonment to death. But there is no intention, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, to repeal the death penalty law in this case, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Thank you, distinguished sponsor, Mr. Speaker. The situation of this is that on June 7, 2002, Republic Act 9165 became law. So that was 2002. Subsequently, in 2007, June 7 of 2006, June 7, 2006, a law was passed, Republic Act 9346, entitled Prohibiting Imposition of Death Penalty in the Philippines. And this particular law had expressly repealed all provisions of laws that would provide for the penalty of death, because clearly this Republic Act is a law that prohibits the imposition of death penalty. So, therefore, since 9165 was 2002, and this was a later law, certainly this later law had abolished the imposition of death penalty in 9165. Okay, now we now have a new bill, which is now, and I congratulate the distinguished sponsor. This bill really strengthens, and I agree that this fully strengthens. There have been many changes. In fact, it's more of a revision than amendment because it has a total overhaul, precisely with the end in view of the chairperson to be able to come out with a more strengthened, with more teeth against drug pushing and the drug menace of our country. So we laud our distinguished sponsor of this bill. However, the situation is, if we will be able to enact this bill strengthening this year or next year, then this will be a later law to Republic Act 9346. This will have, therefore, the implied repeal, whether we have intentions or not to repeal 9346. The mere fact that we will be enacting a bill strengthening the Dangerous Drugs Act, is strengthening it, and therefore is still stating, in fact, in many more provisions now of the penalties in the Dangerous Drugs Law. This will, therefore, implied by the theory and doctrine of implied repeal, repeals Republic Act 9346 in relation to dangerous drugs, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Sponsor. So that will be the effect. So what will happen now will be an indirect restoration of the death penalty, which the Committee on Justice under our chair, Justice Veloso, Ching Veloso, is now hearing, because there are bills that directly goes into the reimposition of death penalty in certain heinous crimes, and including, of course, drugs as one of them. So in other words, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, and distinguished sponsor, there is a need for us to delete those words already. If you have no intention to restore them, we have to delete in this particular bill all the mentioned, all the attribution of the penalty of death in these penalties of the Dangerous Drugs Law. Would the distinguished sponsor agree that in the proper time, this interpellator would be able to move in the period of individual amendments, or if it will be accepted already by the committee chair as a committee amendment in the period of amendment, the removal to foreclose any doubt, to preclude the doctrine of implied repeal. A later law implies a previous law. Then if this will be okay, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, then I will myself would wish to be restored as a co-author, as long as there will be no mention anymore of the death penalty as that has been abolished in 9346, and we do not want, there's no intention to restore the death penalty in drug cases. Mr. Speaker, distinguished sponsor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague from Cagayan de Oro. But let me reiterate, if I may, Mr. Speaker, that Section 13 of the proposed bill merely reiterates the penalty of life imprisonment to death in reference to the Section 11. If you go to the 9165, Republic Act 9165, it did not spell out the penalty as life imprisonment to death, but rather it was written in a way that penalty of maximum penalty is the one that will be imposed. But I do agree Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, that if there was, if the later law will be passed and it will repeal the provision of the previous law, then clearly there was an implied repeal. But in this proposal, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, we did not touch on the issue of the penalty. We just merely spelled out what the maximum penalty as written in Section 13 in reference to Section 11 and corrected it by writing life imprisonment to death. So I know for a fact that if there is irreconcilable or repugnancy in the two laws o yung nagbabanggaang batas, then there might clearly be an implied repeal. But in this case, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, wala ho kaming, we never attempted to touch the subject of the penalties under this proposed bill. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, distinguished sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Precisely, Mr. Chairman, intention will not be looked into. In the doctrines of statutory construction, and what the Supreme Court has ruled many times, it will be verba legis, what is found now in the new law that you are going to have. Now, the new law that you are going to have with this particular bill will now mention again the death penalty. This was repealed expressly by Republic Act 9346. But the point is that if we are going to again include that in the new bill that will be approved, and it incorporates again the words death penalty, Congress is really saying, even if you have an intention, that we are restoring it back in the dangerous drugs law. That is the effect. Because we have now a bill that will now, new one, and it still mentions the death penalty. So therefore, once again, I appeal to our distinguished sponsor to obviate any issue. For after all, the issue of death penalty is being properly ventilated. And we do not want to have a collateral issue on this bill which will affect the Republic Act 9346, which in fact it will if we have a new law that mentions what has already been repealed impliedly. So we restore back. It is a restoration of the death penalty if we put the same words death penalty in this bill is strengthened, which is really a more of a revision and having the same law being again passed. So may we request therefore our distinguished sponsor if he would be able to accept my proposal so that I don't have to be in the individual amendments. If the committee itself would be able to have a committee amendment that will remove any allusion, and let us have the Committee on Justice decide on whether to restore it directly, clearly, so that we will be guided. Depends on the wisdom of the House of Representatives and the Senate. So can we get the response of our dear chairperson of our Dangerous Drugs Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. If I'd like to be educated further with respect to this, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, if we just restore what was written in the 9165, would that in effect restore the penalty of death in the violation of the provisions of this act? I'd just like to be educated further, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, because this is a serious matter that we want to impose on violators of this act, because this is perhaps one way that we can stop the proliferation of drugs in the country. But if the restoration of what was written in the old law will change the effect meaning it would restore the death penalty, then I would be more than willing, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, to accept whatever proposal by the gentleman from Cagayan de Oro at the appropriate time.
Thank you very much, distinguished sponsor, Mr. Speaker. It is my view, and it's supported by the decisions of the Supreme Court, that a later law, which by the doctrine of necessary implication has placed the same words that has been earlier being repealed, it is deemed, because it's a new law that we are going to pass, it is deemed to again be able to repeal impliedly the previous law, which is 9346, prohibiting the imposition of death penalty. And that is why, Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank the open-mindedness of our distinguished colleague, that in the proper time, I will be moving for the deletion of any allusion, any mention of the words death penalty, because we believe that that has been already been abolished, and we will have to have the Justice Committee deliberate on whether in heinous crimes, including drugs, it should be restored. But for these purposes, there will be a necessary implication of an implied repeal if we will again put the death penalty that in Republic Act 9346 had been clearly prohibited. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank you and the distinguished sponsor. May I congratulate? There were so many hearings on this particular bill, and we see, and I have been able to attend most of the hearings, no less than more than 10 times since we started, or even more. And that just shows the diligence and the hardworking chair of our committee. And so that is why I support this. Except the fact that if there is a death provision, I would not, because this is not the proper time to do it, because we are now in the Justice Committee delivering this. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the time of the distinguished colleague, and thank you very much. And if indeed this will not anymore contain the words death penalty, please include me, distinguished sponsor, as a sponsor of this bill, strengthening the draft, the fight against drugs. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very, very much, distinguished sponsor, Congressman Chairman Ace Barbers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much for the distinguished gentleman from Cagayan de Oro for the education that this representation gained as we deliberate on the said measure. Perhaps it is also the right time for this representation to state for the record, Mr. Speaker, that the good gentleman from Cagayan de Oro was very instrumental in crafting this bill. It is true that we had several hearings in the committee deliberating on this particular measure, and it is the wisdom, most of the provisions, it is the wisdom that came from our Deputy Speaker from Cagayan de Oro that were considered in the final copy of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, distinguished Congressman from Cagayan de Oro.
What's the pleasure of the Majority Leader?
Mr. Speaker, next to interpolate, I move we recognize the Honorable Bong Suntay, 4th District of Quezon City. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Bong Suntay is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Kung paihintulutan ho ako ng aking kaibigan at kaskwela na magtanong ng mga clarificatory questions lang ukol dito sa batas na kanyang inihain. At the outset, I would want to manifest that I agree that we have to strengthen our laws regarding dangerous drugs. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that the rights of individuals are amply protected. Ang aking concern ho, Mr. Speaker, through you, dito ho sa panukalang batas, we are shifting the burden of proof from the accuser to the accused. Lest we forget that the presumption of innocence has been described as a golden thread running through criminal laws. It is a norm of customary international law and is protected by numerous international treaties and in various national legal systems. Dito sa panukala natin, marami ho tayong pinalitan dito kung saan yung burden of proof ay sinift natin doon sa inaakusahan. So instead na magkaroon ng presumption of innocence, they are now presumed to have committed the offense.
Unang-una, isang karangalan na Mr. Speaker, at sa tanungin ng ating kagalang-galang na kasamahan dito sa mababang kapulungan at isang kaeskwela ang kanyang mga katanungan ukol dito sa ating inihaing na batas. No? As an answer to the question of the gentleman from Quezon City, whether the constitutional presumption of innocence is changed. Sa aking pong palagay, there are already cases that were decided by the Supreme Court that would answer, no, would still guarantee the presumption of innocence of the accused. No? In People versus Mingoa, the Supreme Court held that a legal presumption, in this case, we are introducing yung legal presumption, does not violate the constitutional presumption of innocence, provided that there should be a rational connection between the proven facts and the presumed fact. In another case, yung People versus Burton, this case I think happened prior to the passing of the RA 9165 in 2002, the constitutional presumption of innocence will not apply as there is some rational connection between the fact proved and the ultimate fact presumed, and the influence of one fact from proof of another shall not be so unreasonable to be arbitrary. So,
Yes,
yun po sa aking palagay, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, ang kasagutan dun sa katanungan ng ating kasamahan, Mr. Speaker.
But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, also in a long line of jurisprudence and decisions by the Supreme Court, such as in Asiatoco versus People, People versus Martinez, Ambre versus People, People versus Figueroa, all those decisions or rulings upheld the presumption of innocence. And dito ho sa mga desisyon na yon ay talagang in-emphasize ng ating mataas na korte, kataas-taasang hukuman, na kung gaano ka-importante yung presumption of innocence. In fact, without the presumption of innocence, there would be little to prevent the state from charging an individual with a crime and forcing you to constantly prove your innocence. In fact, yan ho yung aking kinakatakot. Na, with all the powers that the state possess, what will now prevent the state from filing cases against an individual and forcing an individual to prove his innocence? Yung problema ho kasi yung burden of proof dito eh. We are taking that constitutional right of an individual away from him, yung presumption of innocence.
Well, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yung pong, gaya po na nabanggit ko kanina, ang presumption of innocence is still protected dito po sa proposal na ito. At nabanggit ko rin po kanina yung mga jurisprudence na kung saan ay ginamit at ginaranti yung constitutional presumption of innocence ng isang akusado. Dito sa ating old law, yung RA 9165, ay meron na rin pong mga existing legal disputable presumptions. Ito ay nakalagay dyan sa Section 12, Paragraph 2, Section 16, Paragraph 2, Section 38, kung saan ay inalaw yung paggamit ng legal presumptions. Hindi lamang po dyan, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, meron din hong under the revised penal code, meron din ho tayong presumptions na inaalaw, no? Yung halimbawa ho, yung presumed leader of rebellion, insurrection, or coup d'etat sa revised penal code. Meron din ho dyan yung presumption na ginagamit dun sa malversation of public funds. Meron din ho dun sa libel, no? Yung presumption of malice in libel. So, hindi ho bago itong presumption or legal disputable presumption kung ito po'y idadagdag natin dito sa ating batas. But the qualification is that there should be an unlawful act committed and there must be an apprehension. Yun po, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the reason why I want us to tread with caution with regards to this, while there are some legal disputable presumptions, kung makikita ho natin yung penalty dito sa ating panukalang batas, kung hindi life imprisonment ho, masyadong mabigat. For example, talking about presumption, pupunta ho ako. For example, in line 115, on importation and exportation of dangerous drugs. Ang sinasabi dito, the proposed provision states that any person found to have in his possession or under his direct or indirect control documents related to dangerous drug is presumed to be the owner of such. So, may I ask first, ano ho ba ang definition natin ng under his direct or indirect control?
You're referring to the, what section, Mr.
Line 115.
Line 115.
Ito po, Section 4, fourth paragraph. Any person who is found to have in his or her possession or under his or her direct or indirect control any document, purchase order, memorandum receipt, delivery receipt, bill of ladings, or any written matter containing information related to or in connection with dangerous drugs and or controlled precursors and essential criminals is, unless proven otherwise, presumed to have imported or exported the dangerous drugs and or controlled precursors and essential chemicals that are subject matter of such document or writing.
Well, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, there are elements that must be proven first before it will give rise to a presumption. For instance, dito sa example natin, yung pagiging importer, kapag ho yung documents related dun sa importation of a certain good or goods is under a name of a certain person, and eventually a kilo of shabu was found in the goods that were imported by a certain person, bukod doon, there are elements that must be proven first before I can say, or the authorities can say that he is indeed an importer.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, for example nga, dito, how do we define direct or indirect control? For example, if a document is found not in the body of the person, pero in his car, do we presume that he is in direct control of those documents? So how do we define direct control? So kung nasa auto ho niya yung mga dokumento, wala naman sa kanyang katauhan.
Well, sa aking paniwala, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, it is within his effective control, meaning he has a direct control over the said documents.
So, ibig sabihin kahit hindi pa walang preba na siya yung nagmamayari ng dokumento na yon, basta't makita sa kanyang sasakyan, ibig sabihin siya na yung may direct control ng dokumento na yon o siya yung may pag-aari ng dokumento na yon.
That is correct, Mr. Speaker. Kapag ang dokumento, yung importation for that matter, ay nakapangalan sa kanya yung mga dokumento, and the document will prove that the owner of the importation is a certain person, then siya ho ang may pagmamay-ari.
Paano ho kung wala naman nakapangalan, nakapangalan sa ibang tao? For example, kunyari, yung sasakyan ho for example, ni Congressman Onyx Crisologo, dahil kunyari, hindi kami magkasundo at nilagyan ko ng dokumento habang nakaparada sa labas, does that mean that Congressman Crisologo will have to prove that he does not own that particular document?
Well, the document will prove that he owns the the importation and the document per se, Mr. Speaker, kasi po, kung kanino po nakapangalan yung dokumento, it would appear na siya po ang merong may pagmamay-ari. So,
Evidence yung past historical events would show na wala naman hong mag-i-import ng droga at ipapangalan sa sarili niya yung dokumento. So usually wala hong nakapangalan doon or bogus yung pangalan na ilalagay. So how do you attribute it to the owner of the vehicle?
that is correct, Mr. Speaker. Meron din naman pong senaryo na na-import ng isang sasakyan ni Congressman Onyx Crisologo, and with or without his knowledge, underneath his car, merong 1 kilo ng shabu. Diba? Now, it is now presumed that he owned the 1 kilo of shabu found under the car that he imported.
Now, because if we follow, Mr. Speaker, if we follow that line of thinking, for example, meron akong sa bahay ko, ang lupain ko ay medyo malaki, 1 hektarya, at merong mga dokumento doon sa loob ng bakuran ko nakita pertaining to, dangerous drugs. Does that mean na liable pa rin ako doon?
Well, Mr. Speaker, remember that yung pong ating mga elements that has to be proven will somehow give rise to another presumption. But ito ho ay ang prosecutor o ang prosecution will have to prove na meron pong reasonable ground siya to believe na merong hong nagawang krimen o hindi kaya meron hong probable cause.
Pero dito ho, kasi sa panukala natin, because we shifted the burden of proof, hindi ho yung prosecution ngayon ang magpo-prove na akin yung mga dokumento yun na nakita. It would now be me who needs to prove that I am innocent, that I do not own those documents. So yun ho yung kinakatakot ko. Now, we shifted the burden. So now I have to prove na hindi akin yun. So we could just imagine how easy it would be for other people or for malicious people to set up innocent individuals. Naaalala ko tuloy ang sinabi ni ng eminent scholar William Blackstone that he would rather see 10 guilty individuals set free than have 1 innocent individual convicted. So, yung sa akin lang, yung pag-iingat, while I fully understand the need to strengthen yung ating laws with regards to dangerous drugs, it should not be at the expense of rights which are protected by the Constitution and which should be enjoyed by individuals.
Well, Mr. Speaker, tama po. Naintindihan ko po yung agam-agam at pangamba ng ating kasama, si Congressman Suntay. But I guess it should be clearly stated that yung presumptions do not make one guilty, number 1. Number 2, kailangan pa rin patunayan po sa prosecution beyond reasonable doubt yung existence ng mga kondisyon bago po, and then the burden of evidence shifts. In this case, ang lagi pong may burden of proof ay yung prosecution. At ang burden of evidence ay nandun po sa inakusahan.
Totoo ho yun, Mr. Speaker, totoo yun that we are given or we are still giving the accused opportunity to prove his innocence. Ito yung kinakatakot ko, which is yung actual scenario. If for example, an individual is, kunyari nga, na-set up dun sa kanyang auto ay merong nailagay na whether dokumento or illegal drugs, now, he is presumed to be the owner of such. Since merong presumption that he is the owner of such, ikukulong muna natin siya habang the case is ongoing. Dahil di ba, he is presumed to be the owner of such dangerous drugs. So, natural, kailangan i-detain muna siya o ikulong siya. And with our experience on how slow our justice system is, so maaaring nakakulong ka for several years until you are able to prove na hindi pala sa'yo yun.
Well, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, unang-una ho, ang prosecution, ang nasa kanila ho ang problema para patunayan na ang drogang nakita ay ang merong pagmamayari ay ikaw, no? In that case that you just example that you just gave, Mr. Speaker, napakadami pong elemento na dapat ho munang patunayan ng prosecution bago po i-presume na yung pong droga na nakita ay sa iyo.
No, but Mr. Speaker, but the law which we are proposing has already created that presumption. There is nothing more to prove. Dahil sinabi na ho natin dito sa batas that kagaya nga ho dito sa section 4 sa fourth paragraph natin, sa fifth paragraph, for example, a person is presumed to be a financier if he or she causes the payment, raises, provides, supplies money for or underwrites the importation. Andito madaming presumption, iba-iba ho. Pati sa mga ibang section, unless proven otherwise, sa section 5 naman to, any person found or is present within or inside the place of sale, trading, marketing, dispensation, delivery, or distribution is presumed to have been involved in that sale. Ito ho, kita mo itong presumption na ito. Kunyari, nasa isang bar ho tayo at nagkaroon ng bentahan ng, for example, ng ecstasy. Yung bartender, binentahan yung kanyang customer ng ecstasy. At nataon na nandun ka, dun sa loob ng club na yon. Section 5, the second paragraph states, unless proven otherwise, any person found or is present within or inside the place of sale, trading, marketing, dispensation, delivery, or distribution is presumed to have been involved in the sale. So, basta nandun ka lang, ibig sabihin, ang presumption is kasali ka. Now, the burden is now placed on your shoulders to prove na hindi ka kasali. Yun yung inaalala ko po.
Well, Mr. Speaker, gaya po ng nasabi ko kanina, naintindihan ko po yung pangamba. Ngunit, ang ating pong objective dito sa proposal na ito ay paigtingin, palakasin itong ating dangerous drugs law in order to also apprehend and run after the big-time drug lords and cuddlers and protectors. In the example set by the gentleman from Quezon City, kung halimbawa ho, what if, because we presume that the person does not have anything to do with the drugs found in the car, for instance, as the example we gave earlier, paano naman po? Halimbawa, guilty talaga siya at siya ay nag-import. At kinunsil niya itong drogang ito. So, ang main objective, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, is to prevent a greater evil dito sa panukalang ito. And let our courts decide whether the accused is guilty or not.
Yes.
After consideration of several circumstances, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, as I said, I fully agree that we have to protect our children, our people from dangerous drugs. But in our effort to protect our children and the people from the effects of dangerous drugs, it should not be at the expense of rights which are protected under the Constitution. Naalala ko, nung nag-aaral po ako, nung nasa law school ako, ang sabi sa akin ng aking professor, in any criminal prosecution, the accused is guaranteed the right to be presumed innocent. This presumption of innocence is a guarantee that no person shall be convicted of a crime except upon confession or unless his guilt is established by proof beyond reasonable doubt. This is a fundamental concept under the Due Process Clause of the Constitution. Matters pertaining to the quantum of proof and evidence are matters for the prosecution during the preliminary investigation or for the courts during the trial of the case to decide. So it is up to the prosecution. The burden is on the prosecution to prove an individual's guilt. And we're not just talking about dangerous drugs. In any prosecution, in any criminal case, whether it be relating to drugs or other crime, robbery, extortion, or whatever, the burden is really on the prosecution to prove that the person of the accused is guilty of such crime. Pero dito ho, binaligtad natin eh. Dito, we created the presumption of guilt on the accused. Now, ang ginawa natin, we shifted the burden at sinasabi natin ngayon, o sige, total disputable presumption naman yan. So, presume ka muna na guilty ka, i-prove mo na lang sa korte na hindi ka guilty, na inosente ka. Yun ho yung, yun yung kinakatakot ko ho and yun yung nakikita ko na parang mali po.
Again, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, naintindihan ko po yung inyong pangamba no, na maaaring magamit po ito at maabuso. Ngunit as I stated earlier, number one, the presumption of innocence is guaranteed in this proposal. We never actually touched on the issue of the presumption of innocence of the accused. In fact, pinapatibay nga natin ito nang sa ganon ay maprotektahan yung mga inosente. By mere presumption, that doesn't mean that presumption is already guilt. It means that there are basis or reasonable ground or probable cause for the state to be able to run after the people or the perpetrators of this crime of the violation under this act, Mr. Speaker. Napakahirap po kasi since the time that we passed this law in 2002, wala pa hong nako-convict, none that I know of, Mr. Speaker, na wala pa hong nako-convict na mga cuddlers, protectors, importers. Lagi hong nako-convict dito yung mga street peddlers. And more often than not, ang the cases against these street peddlers, more often than not, are either dismissed or until now pending. So, ang main objective nga po nitong panukalang batas na ito ay bigyan ng pagkakataon ang ating law enforcers, ang ating prosecutors, ang ating mga judges, to be able to determine and run after the big-time perpetrators of the drug crimes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, naiintindihan ko na sa tagal-tagal na na-approvean natin yung panukalang batas about dangerous drugs, iilan lang ang big time na drug dealer ang nakukonvict. But is it a problem with the law or is it a problem of those implementing the law and the prosecutors? Diba? Karamihan, kahit na nung nasa law school kami, nung pinag-aaral namin to on rules of evidence, maraming mga nahuhuli na drug dealer ay napapawalang sala because of improper handling of evidence, because yung prosecutor, yung prosecutor prosecuting the case had had presented a weak case or weak evidence, kaya napapawalang sala. So yung fear ko, baka baliho yung tinitignan natin na imbis na ang ginagawa natin, sinisisi ho natin yung current batas na meron tayo, baka ang kailangan natin sisihin yung nagpapatupad ng batas. Kaya nga ho, kagaya ng sinabi niyo ho, madami tayong mga pulis. For example, in fact, during the previous years, laging nasa ano yan, yung mga ninja cops, yung mga pulis na nakakahuli ng drugs, tapos nun ipinabebenta rin sa iba. Baka ho ang problema natin, hindi ho yung sa batas. Kasi tignan nyo ho dito sa Section 8, for example, the third paragraph of Section 8A, if the property subject of lease is owned by a partnership, corporation, association, or any juridical entity, the person liable to the penalty prescribed in the first paragraph of this section is the corporate or association president, CEO, chief operating officer, or manager, or any partner in a partnership, any member of the board of directors, trustees of any corporations or associations, any estate executor and administrator, or any of their duly authorized representatives. For the purposes of this section, the persons liable in this preceding 3 paragraphs herein, unless proven otherwise, are presumed to have given their consent to illegal use of the leased property. So, isipin nyo, kunyari, si Henry C., for example, kunyari buhay pa, madami akong condominium, ako yung nagme-may-ari, hindi ko naman ho malalaman kung sino ho lahat yung nagrenta nung mga condominium ko. Kung may mahulihan drugs doon, then I am presumed to have knowledge that my place was being used as for illegal purposes. Di ba maling, now I have to prove na wala akong kinalaman doon. I have to go to court to prove that I am innocent. Hindi ho ba masyadong mabigat yung ating ginawang presumption?
Well, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yung under this proposal, meron din po tayo dun sa succeeding sections na kung saan yung lessor or owners of this dive, den, or resort are compelled to report or conduct a periodic check doon sa mga properties na kanilang pinaparent out o kanilang pinapalis and submit a report to the authorities. In this case, sinasabi po natin dito, magsasubmit sila sa board, which is the Dangerous Drugs Board, nung kanilang result ng kanilang inspection. Nang sa ganon, maiwasan ho yung depensa na laging ginagamit na wala akong kinalaman dyan. I rented this place to a certain Mr. Ong, and then Mr. Ong pala is a drug manufacturer at gumawa siya ng clandestine lab dun sa condominium na nirent niya sa akin. We do not immediately take away the responsibility and the liability or accountability nung may-ari ng unit. Kasi if we do that, then that could be a best defense or excuse of these lessors.
For example, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, sa aking kaibigan, for example, I am, babalik ako, whether, siguro may pinakamadaming condominium unit na development, for example, SMDC. So if I was Herbert C. and I had 23,000 condominium units that I am leasing out, so I am expected to visit that 23,000 units every quarter to make a report.
Yes, Mr.
Hindi ho ba masyadong mabigat na...
Well, by the sheer number, Mr. Speaker, if he's going to do it alone, then it probably would be completely illogical. But, Mr. Speaker, meron pong mga condominium managers. And maybe he can appoint people to represent him to conduct this periodic inspection. Meron hong sinasabi na there is a requirement of consent or tolerates the violation of this section. Ngayon, yung consent at saka yung tolerates, napakahirap pong i-prove niyan if we do not use presumption.
Isipin nyo, ho, Mr. Speaker, dear colleague, dito sa visitation na sinasabi natin, babasahin ko yung paragraph. The visitation shall be evidenced by an affidavit to be executed within 5 days from date of visitation and inspection by the private individual, concerned government official or employee or concerned officer of the partnership, corporation, association, or juridical entity that owns the property subject of the lease. And certification from the barangay. The affidavit shall categorically state the following. The date when the inspection of the property was made, the details of the things seen and observed during the inspection, and the fact that the leased premises are not being used for any unlawful purposes. So kailangan mo pa ng, pagka nag-inspect ka, kailangan may kasama ka pang barangay nito. Wala nang gagawin, baka wala nang gawin yung barangay natin kundi mag-inspect na lang ng mga condominium, mga properties which are being leased out. Pagka hindi masamahan ng barangay, then the officers of the corporation will now be made liable dahil hindi nakapagbigay ng report.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it may appear na mahirap gawin ito. But if this is the only way to prevent nga a greater evil of allowing a certain unit, a condominium unit, to be used as a clandestine laboratory or a drug den, then I think it pays when we ask officials, barangay officials, or any person, juridical entity, or any person in authority that has full management and control of the said property, siguro enough na po yan, Mr. Speaker. If this may sound too cumbersome, well, maybe we can, at the appropriate time, maybe we can make some adjustments.
Yes, yes, Mr. Speaker, if the good sponsor would later on agree in the appropriate time, kasi I agree that we have to strengthen and we have to legislate laws that would make the use, dealings with dangerous drugs harder, and then we have to legislate laws that will protect our family, friends, and citizens from such a menace. Yung akin lang ho is yung aking fear na ito ay magamit, itong napakagandang panukala, yung napakagandang layunin nitong panukalang ito ay magamit sa mali. Dahil hindi lang sa line 155, pagka bumaba ako, lines 204, 211, lines 235, 257, 271, inisa-isa ko yung linya kasi. Ang aking obserbasyon lang ho, ulitin ko, is while we consider dangerous drugs as a menace to society, yet we cannot compromise certain fundamental concepts and principles enshrined in our Constitution. When crimes occur, societies often cannot know for certain if a suspect is guilty or innocent. Consequently, societies must grapple with the type of mistakes they will tolerate. Sometimes punishing or scrutinizing the innocent people, or sometimes allowing guilty people to go free. Our criminal justice system has long erred on the side of protecting innocence. Thus, we presume an accused person innocent until they are proven guilty. As the preeminent English jurist, as I mentioned earlier, William Blackstone wrote, better that 10 guilty persons escape than have one innocent suffer. In fact, Benjamin Franklin went further, arguing it is better 100 guilty persons should escape than one innocent person should suffer. So later on, if my good friend, classmate, esteemed colleague would agree to introduce certain amendments so that protection of the rights of individuals could be maintained.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, it would be more than appreciated if the good gentleman from Quezon City will introduce amendments at the appropriate time in order to further strengthen this proposal without sacrificing the innocence of the accused, Mr. Speaker.
Maraming salamat no, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat din sa ating kasamahan from Quezon City sa iyong matalinong pagtatanong.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move we suspend consideration of House Bill number 7814. So moved, Mr. Speaker.
Hearing no objection, the motion is approved. Madam Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the consideration on the third reading of House Bill number 8631. And for this purpose, may I request that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the bill and thereafter to call the roll for nominal voting. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Hearing no objection, the motion is approved. Secretary General is directed to read the title of House Bill 8631.
House Bill 8631, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Benvenido Marejon Marañon. Roll call of members in consideration of House Bill number 8631. Abante, Abaya, Abellanosa, Abu, Abuexaldivar, Abunda, Acop, Acosta, Acosta Alba, Adjong, Advincula, Agabas, Agaraw, Aglipay, Aguinaldo, Albano, Almario, Alonte, Alvarez Franz, Alvarez Senaro, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amante Matba, Amatong, Angara, Aragones, Arbison, Arenas, Arroyo, Atienza, Aumentado, Babasa, Bagatsing, Balindong, Banyas Nograles, Barba, Barbers, Baronda, Bersaga, Bascub, Bautista, Bautista Bandigan, Belmonte, Benitez, Bernos, Biason, Billones, Biron, Bolilla, Bondok, Bordado, Bravo, Brosas, Bulot, Bustos, Kabatbat, Cabochan, Cabredo, Cagas, Calderon, Calixto, Caminero, Campos, Canama, Cawagdan, Cardema, Cari, Castelo, Castro Franz, Castro Fredinil, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero, Cayetano Maria Laarni, Celeste, Chato, Chipeco, Chungalaw, Co Angelica, Co Elizaldi, Cuanco, Colyantes, Crisologo, Cua, Quaresma, Cueva, Colyamat, Dagoo, Dalipe, Dalog, Dasa, De Jesus, De Venecia, Defensor Lawrence, Defensor Michael, De Los Santos, De Loso Montalya, De Maporo Abdullah, De Maporo Muhammad Khalid, Duavit, Duhali, Duterte, D. Faustino Ino, D. Faustino Michael III, D. Ian Paul, Ebcas, Ecleo, Elago, Enverga, Erice, Erigel, Ermita Buhain, Escudero, Espina, Espino, Estrella, Fariñas Ria, Fariñas, Rudy Cesar, Fernandez, Fernando, Fer Juliet, Fer Luis, Flores, Fortun, Fortuno, Frasco, Fuentebella, Gaite, Garbin, Garcia Jose Enrique, Garcia Pablo Jan, Garcia Vincent, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Gasataya, Gatchalian, Gato, Heron, Go Ed, Go Mark, Gonzaga, Gonzales, Aurelio Dong, Gonzales Neptali, Gonzales Sandro, Guruseta, Gico, Gullias, Guya, Haresco, Hataman, Hernandez, Herrera D, Hofer, Halusos, Javier, Jimenez, Co Elisa, Co Wilton, Kong Hun, Labad-Labad, Lacson, Lacson Noel, Lagman, Lagon, Lara, Lasatin, Liachon, Legarda, Lim Kay Chong, Lopez, Loyola, Losotan, Macapagal Arroyo, Maceda, Madrona, Malapitan, Mangawang, Magundadato, Marcoleta, Mariano Hernandez, Mariño, Marquez, Martinez, Matba, Matugas, Mendoza, Mercado, Momo, Natividad Naganyo, Nava, Nieto, Noel, Nograles, Jericho, Nograles, Juan Fidel, Nolasco, Núñez Malañao, Wamenal, Olivares, Ongse, Ongroni, Ordanes, Ortega, Uwano Dizon, Pacquiao Alberto, Pacquiao Rogelio, Padiernos, Paduano, Palma, Pancho, Panotes, Peña, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Plaza, Puno, Kimbo, Radaza, Ramirez Sato, Remulla, Revilla, Reyes, Rivera, Robes, Rodriguez, Roman, Romero, Romualdez Ferdinand, Romualdez Yedamarie, Romualdo, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sakaluran, Salceda, Salimbangon, Salo, Sanchez, Sancopan, Santos Recto, Sarmento, Saulug, Savillano, Xiao, Silverio, Singson Mihan, Sinsuat, Swansing Estrelita, Swansing Horacio, Suarez Aleta, Suarez David, Suntay, C. Alvarado, Taduran, Talyado, Tambunting, Tan Alisa, Tan Angelina, Tan Shamir, Tan Shari, Tan Sherny, Tejada, Teves Arnulfo, Teves Jose, Tianco, Tolentino, Torres Gomez, Tulfo, Tupas, Chutor, T. Alan, T. Diego, Umali Alfonso, Umali Maria Victoria, Unabia, Ungab, Uy Juliet, Uy Rolando, Valeriano, Valmayor, Vargas, Vargas Alfonso, Velasco, Veloso, Vergara, Villa, Villafuerte, Villanueva Brother Eddie, Villanueva Noel, Villar, Villaras Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Eric, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora Ronaldo, Zamora Waikurat, Zarate Zubiri. Second call for House Bill number 8631. Abante, Abaya, Acosta, Adjong, Agaraw, Alonte, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amatong, Arenas, Atienza, Humentado, Baronda, Bernos, Biason, Billones, Bulot, Kawagdan, Cardema, Kari, Chungalao, Ko Angelica, Ko Elizalde, Kuwangko, Daza, De Jesus, De Venecia, Defensor Michael, Duavit, Duhali, Di Faustino Ino, Enverga, Erice, Ermita Buhayin, Fariñas Rudy Cesar, Fernandez, Fernando, Flores, Garbin, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Gatchalian, Go Ed, Gonzaga, Haresco, Hataman, Hernandez, Halusos, Ko Wilton, Konghun, Lagman, Liachon, Malapitan, Marcoleta, Mariano Hernandez, Matba, Mendoza, Nograles Juan Fidel, Nolasco, Núñez Malañaon, Ordanes, Paduano, Panotes, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Romero, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sanchez, Xiao, Silverio, Singson, Suarez Aleta, Suarez David, C. Alvarado, Tan Alisa, Tan Shamir, Tan Sherny, Torres Gomez, T. Alan, U. Juliet, Veloso, Villa, Villar, Villaras Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora Waikorat, Zubiri.
with 206 members voting in the affirmative, 0 negative, and 0 abstentions. House Bill number 8631 is now approved on third and final reading. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the consideration on third reading of House Bill number 8632. For this purpose, may I request that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the bill and thereafter to call the roll for nominal voting. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
With no objection, the motion is approved. Secretary General is directed to read the title of the bill and thereafter call the roll for nominal voting.
House Bill number 8632, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Kako Angefranik Williams Kakomi. Roll call of members in consideration of House Bill number 8632. Abante, Abaya, Abellanosa, Abu, Abueg Zaldivar, Abunda, Acop, Acosta, Acosta Alba, Adjong, Agvincula, Agabas, Agarao, Aglipay, Aguinaldo, Albano, Almario, Alonte, Alvarez France, Alvarez Senaro, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amante Matba, Amatong, Angara, Aragones, Arbison, Arenas, Arroyo, Atienza, Aumentado, Babasa, Bagatsing, Balindong, Banyas Nograles, Barba, Barbers, Baronda, Bersaga, Bascug, Bautista, Bautista Bendigan, Belmonte, Benitez, Bernos, Biason, Billones, Biron, Bolilla, Bondoc, Bordado, Bravo, Brosas, Bulot, Bustos, Kabatbat, Cabochan, Cabredo, Cagas, Calderon, Calixto, Caminero, Campos, Canama, Cawagdan, Cardema, Cari, Castelo, Castro France, Castro Fredinil, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero, Cayetano Mariala Arni, Celeste, Chato, Chipeco, Chungalauco, Angelica Coelizaldi, Cuanco, Colyantes, Crisologo, Cua, Quaresma, Cueva, Culyamat, Dago, Dalipe, Dalog, Dasade, Sus de Venecia, Defensor Lawrence, Defensor Michael, De Los Santos, De Loso Montalya, Demoporo Abdullah, Demoporo Muhammad Khalid, Duavit, Duhali, Duterte, Di Faustino Ina, Di Faustino Michael III, Di Ian Paul, Ebcas, Ecleo, Elago, Enverga, Erice, Erigel, Ermita Buhain, Escudero, Espina, Espino, Estrella, Fariñas Ria, Fariñas Rudy Caesar, Fernandez, Fernando, Fer Juliet, Fer Luis, Flores, Fortun, Fortuno, Frasco, Fuentebella, Gaite, Garbin, Garcia, Jose Enrique, Garcia, Pablo Jan, Garcia Vincent, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Gasataya, Gatchalian, Gato, Heron, Go, Edgo, Mark, Gonzaga, Gonzales, Aurelio Dong, Gonzales Neptali, Gonzales Sandro, Goroseta, Gico, Gullas, Guya, Haresco, Ataman, Hernandez, Herrera D, Hofer, Haluso, Xavier Jimenez, Ko Elisa, Ko Wilton, Kong Hun, Labad Labad, Lacson Noel, Lagman, Lagon, Lara, Lasatino, Liachon, Legarda, Limlim Kaichong, Lopez, Loyola, Losotan, Macapagal Arroyo, Maceda, Madrona, Malapitan, Mangawang, Magundadato, Marcoleta, Mariana Hernandez, Marino Marquez, Martinez, Matba, Matugas, Mendoza, Mercado, Momo, Natividad Nagaño, Nava, Nieto, Noel Nograles, Jericho, Nograles, Juan Fidel, Nolasco, Nunez Malañaon, Waminal, Olivares, Ong Jose, Ong Roni, Ordanes, Ortega, Uano Dizon, Pacquiao, Alberto Pacquiao, Rogelio, Padjernos, Paduano, Palma, Pancho, Panotes, Peña, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Plaza, Puno, Kimbo, Radasa, Ramirez, Sato, Rimulya, Revilla, Reyes, Rivera, Robes, Rodriguez, Roman Romero, Romualdez Ferdinand, Romualdez Sieda Marie, Romualdo, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sakaluran, Salceda, Salimbangon, Salo, Sanchez, Sancopan, Santos Recto, Sarmento, Saulug, Sevillano, Xiao Silverio, Singson Mian, Sinsuat, Swansing Estrelita, Swansing Horacio, Suarez Aleta, Suarez David, Suntay, Si Alvarado, Taduran Talyado, Tambunting, Tan Alisa, Tan Angelina, Tan Shamir, Tan Shari, Tan Sherny, Teada, Teves Arnulfo, Teves Jose, Tiangco Tolentino, Torres Gomez, Tulfo Tupas Chutor, T. Alan T. Diego, Umali Alfonso, Umali Maria Victoria, Unabia, Ungab, Uy Juliet, Uy Rolando, Valeriano, Valmayor, Vargas Alfonso, Velasco, Veloso, Vergara, Villafuerte, Villanueva, Brother Eddie, Villanueva Noel, Villar Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Eric, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora Ronaldo, Zamora Waycorat, Zarate, Zubiri. Second call for House Bill number 8632. Abante, Abaya, Acosta, Adjong, Algarao, Alonte, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amatong, Arenas, Atienza, Aumentado, Baronda, Biason, Billones, Bulot, Cawagdan, Cardema, Cari, Chungalao, Co Angelica, Co Elizalde, Cuanco, Dasa, De Sus, De Venecia, Defensor Michael, Duavit, Duhali, Di Faustino, Ina, Enverga, Erice, Ermita Buhain, Fariñas, Rudy Cesar, Fernandez, Fernando Flores, Garbin, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Go, Ed Gonzaga, Haresco, Hataman Hernandez, Halos Hos, Co Wilton, Kong Hun, Lagman, Liachon, Malapitan, Marcoleta, Mariana Hernandez, Matba, Mendoza, Mercado, Nograles, Juan Fidel, Nolasco, Nunez Malañaon, Ordanes, Panotes, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Romero, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sanchez, Xiao, Silvero, Singson, Suarez, Aleta, Suarez, David, C. Alvarado, Tanalisa, Tan Shamir, Tan Sherny, Torres Gomez, T. Alan, Uy Juliet, Veloso, Villa, Villar, Villara Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora, Waikorat, Zubiri.
With 210 members voting in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and 0 abstentions. House Bill number 8632 is hereby approved on third and final reading. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move for the consideration on third reading of House Bill number 8664. For this purpose, may I request that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the bill and thereafter to call the roll for nominal voting. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Is there any objection? The chair is none. The motion is approved. Secretary General is directed to read House Bill 8664 and conduct nominal voting.
House Bill 8664, an act providing for the reapportionment of the province of Bataan into 3 legislative districts. Roll call of members. In consideration of House Bill number 8664, Abante, Abaya, Bellanosa, Abo, Buexaldivar, Bunda, Acop, Acosta, Alba, Adjong, Advincula, Agabas, Agaraw, Aglipay, Aguinaldo, Albano, Almario, Alonte, Alvarez France, Alvarez Senaro, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amante Matba, Amatong, Angara, Aragones, Arbizon, Arenas, Arroyo, Atienza, Mentado, Babasa, Bagatsing, Balindong, Baños Nograles, Barba, Barbers, Baronda, Bersaga, Bascug, Bautista, Bendigan, Belmonte, Benitez, Bernos, Biason, Billones, Biron, Bolilla, Bondoc, Bordado, Bravo, Brosas, Bulot, Bustos, Kabatbat, Cabochan, Cabredo, Cagas, Calderon, Calixto, Caminero, Campos, Canama, Cawagdan, Cardema, Cari, Castelo, Castro France, Castro Fredinil, Cayetano, Alan Peter, Compañero, Cayetano, Mariela Arni, Celeste, Chato, Chipeco, Chungalauco, Angelica, Coelizaldi, Cuanco, Collantes, Crisologo, Cua, Quaresma, Cueva, Culyamat, Dagook, Dalipe, Dalog, De Jesus, De Venecia, Defensor Lawrence, Defensor Michael, De Los Santos, De Los Montalia, De Maporo Abdullah, De Maporo, Muhammad Khalid, Duavit, Duhali, Duterte, Di Faustino Ina, Di Faustino Michael III, Di Ian Paul, Ebcas, Ecleo, Elago, Enverga, Erice, Erigel, Ermita Buhayn, Escudero, Espina, Espino, Estrella, Fariñas Ria, Fariñas, Rudy Cesar, Fernandez, Fernando, Fer Juliet, Fer Luis, Flores, Fortuno, Frasco, Fuentebella, Gaite, Garbin, Garcia, Jose Enrique Garcia, Pablo Jan, Garcia Vincent, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Gasataya, Gatchalian, Gato, Herongo, Edgo Mark, Gonzaga, Gonzales, Aurelio Dong, Gonzales Neptali, Gonzales Sandro, Goroseta, Gico, Gullas, Guya, Haresco, Hataman, Hernandez, Herrera D, Hofer, Halusos, Javier Jimenez, Co Elisa, Co Wilton, Conhun, Labad, Lacson Noel, Lagman, Lagon, Lara Lasatin, Liachon, Legardo, Limlem Kaichong, Lopez, Loyola, Lusotan, Macapagal Arroyo, Maceda, Madrona, Malapitan, Mangawang, Magunda Dato, Marcoleta, Mariano Hernandez, Marino, Marquez, Martinez, Matba, Matugas, Mendoza, Mercado, Momo, Natividad Nagaño, Nava, Nieto, Noel Nograles, Jericho Nograles, Juan Fidel, Nolasco, Nunez Malañaon, Waminal Olivares, Jose Ongroni, Ordanes, Ortega, Juan Dizon, Pacquiao Alberto, Pacquiao Rogelio, Padjernos, Paduano, Palma, Pancho, Panotes, Peña, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Plaza Puno, Kimbo, Radasa, Ramirez Sato, Remulla, Revilla, Reyes, Rivera, Robes, Rodriguez, Roman Romero, Romualdez, Ferdinand Romualdez, Yeda Marie, Romualdo, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sakaluran, Salcedo, Salimbango, Salo, Sanchez, Sancopan, Santos Recto, Sarmiento, Saulug, Sevillano, Xiao Silverio, Singson Mian, Sinsuat, Swansing Estrelita, Swansing Horacio, Suarez Aleta, Suarez David, Suntay, C. Alvarado, Taduran Talyado, Tambunting, Tan Alisa, Tan Angelina, Tan Shamir, Tan Shari, Tan Sherny, Teada, Teves Arnulfo, Teves Jose, Tianco Tolentino, Torres Gomez, Tulfo, Tupas Shutor, T. Alan T. Diego, Umali Alfonso, Umali, Maria Victoria, Unabia, Ungab, Uy Juliet, Uy Rolando, Valeriano, Valmayor, Vargas Alfonso, Velasco, Veloso, Vergara, Villa, Villafuerte, Villanueva, Brother Eddie, Villanueva Noel, Villar, Villara Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Eric, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora Ronaldo, Zamora Waikorat, Zarate, Zubiri. Second call for House Bill number 8664. Abante, Abaya, Acosta, Adjong, Agaraw, Alonte, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amatong, Arenas, Atienzo, Mentado, Baronda, Biason, Billones, Bulot, Kawagdan, Cardema, Cari, Chungalaw, Ko Angelica, Ko Elizalde, Kuwangko, Dasa de Jesus de Venecia, Defensor Michael, Duavit Duali, D. Faustino Ino, Enverga, Erisa, Ermita Buaynes, Fariñas, Rudy Cesar, Fernandez, Fernando Flores, Garbin, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Go Ed Gonzaga, Haresco, Hataman, Halusos, Ko Wilton, Konghun, Lagman, Liachon, Malapita, Marcoleta, Mariano Hernandez, Matba, Mendoza, Mercado, Nograles, Juan Fidel Nolasco, Núñez Malañao, Ordanes, Panotes, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Romero, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sanchez, Xiao, Silverio, Singson, Suarez, Aleta, Suarez, David, C. Alvarado, Tanalisa, Tanshamir, Tansherni, Torres Gomez, T. Alan, Uy Juliet, Velosa, Villa, Villar, Villara Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora Waikorat, Zubiri.
With 202 members voting in the affirmative, 0 in negative, and 6 abstention, House Bill 8664 is approved on third and final reading. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, before we proceed to consider House Bill number 5421, I move that we recognize Representative Euphemia Kafemia Kulyamat, who wishes to make a manifestation regarding the said bill.
Honorable Kalyamat is hereby recognized.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, magmanipisto po ako na mag-withdraw as co-author sa HB 5421. Salamat, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, with the manifestation of Representative Kulyamat, I move that her name be withdrawn as one of the co-authors of House Bill number 5421.
There is an objection. The chair is none. The motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Speaker, I now move that we consider on third reading House Bill number 5421 and that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the measure and thereafter call the roll for nominal voting.
There is an objection. The chair is none. The motion is approved. The Secretary General is directed to read House Bill 5421 and conduct nominal voting.
House Bill 5421, an act declaring certain parcels of land of public domain located in barangays Bunog, Iran, Punta Baja, Kampong Ulay, and Ransang of the Municipality of Jose P. Rizal, Province of Palawan, as agricultural land open to disposition for agricultural, commercial, residential, industrial, and other productive purposes. Roll call of members in consideration of House Bill number 5421. Abante, Abaya, Bellanosa, Abu, Abig Saldivar, Abunda, Acop, Acosta, Acosta Alba, Adjong, Advincula, Agabasa, Garao, Aglipay, Aguinaldo, Albano, Almario, Alonte, Alvarez Franz, Alvarez Senaro, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amante Matba, Matong, Angara, Aragones, Arbizon, Arenas, Arroyo, Atienza, Aumentado, Babasa, Bagatsing, Balindong, Banyas Nograles, Barba, Barbers Baronda, Bersaga, Bascug, Bautista, Bautista Bendigan, Belmonte, Benitez, Bernos, Biason, Billones, Biron, Bolilla, Bondok, Bordado, Bravo, Brosas, Bulot, Bustos, Kabatbat, Kabotyan, Cabredo, Cagas, Calderon, Calixto, Caminero, Campos, Canama, Kawagdan, Cardema, Cari, Castelo, Castro Franz, Castro Fredinil, Cayetano, Alan Peter Compañero, Cayetano, Mariala Arni, Celeste, Chato, Chipeco, Chungalaw, Co Angelica, Co Elizalde, Cuangco, Collantes, Crisologo, Cuwa, Quaresma, Cueva, Colyamat, Dagook, Dalipe, Dasal, De Jesus de Venecia, Defensor Lawrence, Defensor Michael, De Los Santos, De Los Montoya, Demaporo Abdullah, Demaporo Muhammad Khalid, Duavit Duali Duterte, D. Faustino Ina, D. Faustino Michael III, D. Ian Paul, Ebcas, Ecleo, Ilago, Enverga, Erisa, Ergel, Ermita Buhain, Escudero, Espina, Espino, Estrella, Farinas Ria, Farinas Rudy Caesar, Fernandez, Fernando, Ferrer Juliet, Ferrer Luis, Flores, Fortuno, Frasco, Fuentebella, Gaite, Garbin, Garcia, Jose Enrique Garcia, Pablo Jan, Garcia, Vincent, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Gasataya, Gatchalian, Gato, Herongo, Edgo, Mark, Gonzaga, Gonzales, Aurelio, Don Gonzales, Neptali, Gonzales, Sandro, Guruseta, Gico, Gullas, Guya, Haresco, Hataman, Hernandez, Herrera D, Hofer, Luso, Xavier Jimenez, Ko Elisa, Ko Wilton, Kong Hun, Labad, Lacson, Noel, Lagman, Lagon, Lara, Lasatin, Liachon, Legarda, Limlim, Kaichong, Lopez, Loyola, Losotan, Macapagal Arroyo, Maceda, Madrona, Malapitan, Mangawang, Magundadato, Mark Coleta, Mariano Hernandez, Marino, Marquez Martinez, Matba, Matugas, Mendoza, Mercado, Momo, Natividad, Nagaño, Nava, Nieto, Noel, Nograles, Jericho, Nograles, Juan Fidel, Nolasco, Nunez, Malañao, Nuominal, Olivares, Ong Jose, Ong Ronnie, Ordanes, Ortega, Uwano Dizon, Pacquiao Alberto, Pacquiao Rogelio, Padiernos, Paduano, Palma, Pancho, Panotes, Peña, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Plaza Puno, Kimbo, Radasa, Ramirez Sato, Remulla, Revilla, Reyes, Rivera, Robes Rodriguez, Roman Romero, Romualdez Ferdinand, Romualdez, Yeda Marie, Romualdo, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sakaluran, Salceda, Salimbangon, Salo Sanchez, Sancopan, Santos Recto, Sarmiento, Saulug, Savillano, Xiao Silverio, Singson, Mihan, Sinsuat, Swansing Estrita, Swansing Horacio, Suarez Aleta, Suarez David, Suntay, Si Alvarado, Taduran Talyado, Tambunting, Tanalisa, Tan Angelina, Tan Shamir, Tan Shari, Tan Sherny, Teada, Teves Arnulfo, Teves Jose, Tiangco, Tolentino, Torres Gomez, Tulfo, Tupas Chutor, T. Alan T. Diego, Umali, Alfonso Umali, Maria Victoria, Unabia, Ungab, Uy Juliet, Uy Rolando, Valeriano, Valmayor, Vargas, Alfonso, Velasco, Veloso, Vergara, Villa, Villafuerte, Villanueva, Brother Eddie, Villanueva Noel, Villar, Villara Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Eric, Yak Victor, Yu Zamora, Ronaldo, Zamora, Waikorat, Zarate, Zubiri. Second call for House Bill number 5421. Abante, Abaya, Acosa, Adjong, Agaraw, Alonte, Alvarez Pantaleon, Amatong, Arenas, Umintado, Baronda, Biason, Billones, Bulot, Kawagdan, Cardema, Kari, Chungalaw, Ko Angelica, Ko Elizalde, Kuwangko, Dasa de Jesus de Venecia, Defensor Michael, Duavit, Duhali, Di Faustino, Ino, Enverga, Irise, Remita Buhain, Farinas, Rudy Cesar Fernandez, Fernando Flores, Garbin, Garin Janet, Garin Sharon, Go Ed Gonzaga, Haresco, Hataman, Halusos, Ko Wilton Konghun, Lagman, Liachon, Malapitan, Mariano Hernandez, Matba, Mendoza, Mercado, Nograles, Juan Fidel, Nolasco, Nunez Malañaon, Ordanes, Panotes, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Romero, Romulo, Roque, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sanchez, Xiao, Silverio, Singson, Suarez, Aleta, Suarez David, Si Alvarado, Tan Alisa, Tan Shamir, Tan Sherny, Torres Gomez, T. Alan, Uy Juliet, Veloso, Villa, Villar, Villara Suarez, Villarica, Violago, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora Waikorat, Zubiri.
With 201 members voting in the affirmative, 7 in the negative, 2 abstention, House Bill 5421 is hereby approved on third and final reading. Majority Leader.
Explanation of vote for House Bill number 5421. Honorable Gaite.
Honorable Gaita is hereby recognized.
Salamat po, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, mga kapwa ko mamabatas, no ang boto ng representasyong ito para sa House Bill 5421. Naniniwala ang kinatawang ito na ang panukalang batas ay magpapabilis lamang ng konbersyon ng mga lupang ninuno ng mga pambansang minorya at lupang sakahan sa bayan ng Jose P. Rizal sa lalawigan ng Palawan tungong malalaking plantasyon ng oil palm, minahan at pook pasyalan o tourist spots. Ang konbersyon ng mga lupang ito ay magreresulta lamang sa pagpapalayas ng ating mga pambansang minorya, mga magsasaka, at pagkasira ng 14,28 hektaryang kagubatan dulot ng pagpasok ng mga malalaking negosyo. Bilang dagdag na kaalaman, ang lugar ng Rizal, Palawan ay kung saan makikita ang mga katutubong palawan kung kanino ipinangalan ang buong isla. Sa katunayan, may pinagtatalunan sa usapin ng mga boundaries sa pagitan ng mga katutubo at ng gobyerno sa kasalukuyan. Kaya naman sa ganitong kalagayan, no ang vote ng representasyong ito. Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the Secretary General be directed to immediately transmit the 4 House bills that we approved on third reading today.
Is there an objection? The chair is none. The motion is approved. The Secretary General is so directed. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we resume consideration on House Bill number 7814 as contained in Committee Report number 550 and that the Secretary General be directed to read the title of the measure.
Is there an objection? The chair is none. The motion is approved. Secretary General is hereby directed to read House Bill 7814.
House Bill 7814, an act strengthening drug prevention and control, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 9165 as amended, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the parliamentary status is that we are in the period of sponsorship and debate. I move that we recognize to resume his sponsorship of the measure the chairman of the Committee on Dangerous Drugs, Representative Robert Ace Barbers, and to interpolate our sponsor, I move that we recognize Representative Carlos Isagani Zarate of Party List Bayan Muna.
Is there an objection? The chair is none. Representative Robert Ace Barber is hereby recognized, and also Representative Kaloy Zarate is hereby recognized. To interpolate.
Salamat, kagalang-galang na Speaker. Mamarapatin po ba ng ating kagalang-galang na sponsor, ang chair ng Committee on Dangerous Drugs, ang kagalang-galang na sponsor from Surigao del Norte na makapagtanong tayo ng ilang mga paglilinaw sa mga probisyon ng panukalang batas.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, isa pong karangalan para po sa representasyong ito na matuto sa mga pagtatanong at pagka-clarify ng ating kasamahan na si Distinguished Congressman Kaloy Zarate, Mr. Speaker.
Maraming salamat, ginoong sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Yung iba ko pong katanungan ay nabanggit na rin at nalilinaw na rin ng ilang mga kasamahan natin kaninang na unang nag-interpolate. Pero gusto ko lang madugtungan ito ng mga ilan pang punto. Bilang panimula, ginoong sponsor, Mr. Speaker, pwede ho bang maitanong natin sa kagalang-galang na sponsor ang ilang mga datos? Nung magsimula po ang kampanya laban sa droga ng kasalukuyang administrasyon, pwede po bang maisaad ng kagalang-galang na sponsor, ilan ho ang mga namatay na mga biktima doon sa tinatawag nilang operasyon na ginawa ng ating mga kapulisan at iba pang mga law enforcement agencies? Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Maraming salamat po sa katanungan, distinguished colleague at Mr. Speaker. However, the records that I have at the moment does not include yung sagot po doon sa katanungan ni Congressman Zarate kung ilan po ang fatalities nitong sinasabing drug war, Mr. Speaker.
Well, at any rate, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, ang sinasabi po ng ating mga kapulisan at iba pang mga law enforcement agencies, humigit kumulang, ang inaamin nila ay 7,000 ang namatay sa iba't ibang operasyon ng mga kapulisan at iba pang law enforcement agencies. Ito yung mga tinatawag nilang mga nanlaban, or namatay sa panahon ng operasyon. And iba pang usapin, yung libo-libo ring namatay sa tinatawag nilang death under investigation or DUI. Ito naman daw yung napaslang dahil ito yung mga riding in tandem na related din sa drugs. But there are other estimates, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, kung matatandaan ninyo, other estimates range from 20,000 to 30,000 ang namatay na sa kampanya laban sa droga magmula nung June 30 or July 1 of 2016 at least hanggang sa kasalukuyan. So, kaya ko po nabanggit yan, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, isa pong matingkad dito sa usapin ng kampanya laban sa droga ay yung usapin ng napakaraming naging biktima rito ay mga ordinaryong individual at mga mahihirap sa katunayan. In fact, kung titingnan rin natin ang iba't ibang mga kulungan sa iba't ibang bahagi ng bansa. No? Libo-libo, karamihan sa mga libo-libong nakukulong dito ay nagmumula rin sa sektor ng mahihirap at mga aping sektor ng ating lipunan, no? Ng mga biktima nitong tinatawag nating problema ng droga. So dito ko simulan ang aking katanungan, ginoong sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Paano matugunan ito sa pag-amyanda natin ng kasalukuyang batas patungkol dito sa mga dangerous na droga under the bill in consideration, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker?
Well, tama po ang nabanggit ng ating kasamahan, si Congressman Zarate, tungkol po doon sa mga sektor na mga mahihirap na kung saan ay karamihan sa kanila ang siyang nagiging biktima nitong illegal na droga. You are correct, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, na kaya po nagkaroon kami ng rason na amendahan, silipin at tingnan kung saan banda natin pwedeng amendahan ang ating kasalukuyang batas tungkol sa illegal drugs na hindi lamang po nakatuon doon sa sinasabi po natin na nasa sektor ng mga mahihirap. Dahil ang intention po nitong ating panukalang batas ay to run after the cuddlers, the protectors. This could be the narco judges, this could be the narco generals, this could also be the narco politicians. At maging matagumpay yung prosecution hanggang conviction ng mga sinasabing tao na nasa likod ng sindikato ng illegal na droga, gaya po ng mga drug lords. Kaya dito ho, dun sa ating sa kasalukuyang batas, ay nakita po natin na maaring may mga kakulangan na dapat nating sigurong tingnan in order to strengthen it, paigtingin natin sa pamamagitan po ng paggamit o pag-apply nung sinasabi nating legal disputable presumptions sa paghahabol dito sa mga taong ito, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Salamat, kagalang-galang na sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Ang sinasabi po ba ng ating kagalang-galang na sponsor pag ating papayagan ang mga panukalang susog o amyenda sa batas ng droga as proposed in this bill in consideration ay mababawasan kung hindi man mawala, no? Yung mga kasong binanggit ko kanina, yung mga pagpaslang na nagawa doon sa ating mga mahihirap, no? Yung extrajudicial killings, no? Na ang naging biktima ay maraming mga kababayan nating mahihirap dahil sinabi ng mga kapulisan na sila ay nanlaban, no? And kahit na doon sa ating mga iba't ibang mga kulungan sa iba't ibang bansa, bahagi ng bansa ngayon, ay yun din ang pinakamaraming bilang ng mga nakakulong, yung sektor ng mga mahihirap. Yun po ba ang gustong sabihin ng ating kagalang-galang na sponsor, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, ito pong panukalang ito ay hindi lamang po nakatuon doon sa ating mga kababayan na nasa mahirap na sektor, kundi this will apply to all. Mayaman, mahirap, powerful, hindi o powerless. Lahat po, this will apply to all violators, including the wealthy people in our society. O yung mga, yung mga matataas ang kanilang, what do you call that, yung level ng kanilang pamumuhay sa ating komunidad. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. Kasi, kagaya po, kunyari, yung pong dun sa mga exclusive bars, resorts, restaurants, hotels, ito po, ang mga may-ari po nito ay yung mga may kakayahan o yung meron pong mataas ang antas ng kanilang pamumuhay sa ating society. So, if we want to run after them for assuming having allowed their property to be used as a drug den or hindi kaya ay isang lugar na kung saan nagbebenta ng droga, we will definitely, this law will definitely run after them, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. So, ibig sabihin po, hindi na lamang yung ating ordinary street peddlers ang tinatarget nitong batas na to, kundi tinatarget na rin po under this new proposal yung mga suspects, protectors, negligent lessors, mga people in authority and in power na abulin at panagutin under sa batas na ito, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor, at pasensya na po at na-mute ata ako. No? Salamat po doon sa inyong katugunan. No? We love the objective, no, of the sponsor, no, in trying to amend the current laws on drugs. No? But yun nga po ang isa sa, I will again reiterate, yung mga pangamba ng ating mga kasamahan. No? When we create additional presumptions, no, as expressed in this proposed bill, ang pangamba po ng marami ay ito ay magpapalala lamang doon sa mga naging paglabag sa karapatan ng ating mga mamamayan. No? Remember, within this period, 4 years, no, when this campaign against drug was launched by the present administration, ang naging presumption pa lang noon, andyan yung presumption ng regularity, no, in the performance of their duties ng PNP. At officially, umabot ito sa 7,000 ang napaslang. No? And during budget deliberations, nung tinanong natin dito sa 7,000 na ito, alinsunod sa kanilang guidelines and protocols, kung ilan ba ang inimbestigahan nila rito as legitimate encounters, no? Legitimate operations that resulted to the death of these individuals, ay halos wala hong 1% doon sa 7,000 na yan. No? Na supposedly, automatic na this should be subjected to inquest proceedings. No? Kapag meron pong napaslang sa isang police operation, no, na katulad ng ginagawa ng ating mga otoridad dito sa kampanya laban sa droga. At yun po ang ating pangamba dito sa proposal na additional presumptions. No? Can you imagine, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, gaya nung nabanggit kanina ng ating chair ng Committee on Human Rights, the presumption, no, na pag may nakitang resibo sa iyo, you will already be presumed, no, na ikaw yung importer ng droga. At pwedeng isang maging dahilan na ito, no, na ilagay ka doon sa statistika, kung hindi man nahuli at nakulong, ay namatay. At kung tanungin, bakit napaslang yan? There is a presumption na importer siya ng droga. At nung hinuli namin siya, nanlaban, kaya napaslang. No? So, parang binibigyan po natin ng dagdag na ammunition o bala yung mga katulad ng mga pumaslang kay Kian de los Santos na mas palawakin pa nila ang kanilang ginagawang shortcut type of justice, no, if you can call that justice, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, because of all these presumptions na gusto nating i-introduce dito sa ating panukalang batas. May we get a response from the sponsor, Mr. Speaker?
Salamat po, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. Ako po ay sumasang-ayon, no, doon sa punto na kung saan ay hindi po dapat magamit itong panukalang batas na ito bilang paraan para i-shortcut yung pagpapataw ng parusa sa ating mga kababayan. No? In this case, yung extrajudicial killings. But again, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, ang ating pong proposal does not in any way encourage or speak of extrajudicial killings. It just gave additional legal tool or instrument for us to be able to run after yung mga tinatawag po nating malalaking tao sa likod ng sindikato ng droga. Kagaya po yung sinasabi ating drug lord. Marami po nagsasabi, puro ho tayo mga street peddlers lang yung ating nahuhuli. Wala naman tayong nahuhuling cuddlers, protectors, drug lords. It's simply because napakahirap po under the present law na sila po ay kasuhan at sila po ay habulin. So doon po tayo nakatuon itong panukalang batas na ito. While I understand, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yung pangamba ng ating kasamahan, lalo't-lalo na yung pagkondena, no, dito sa paggamit ng extrajudicial killing as a tool, ako po ay sang-ayon at kaisa ng ating kasamahan na si Congressman Zarate na kinukundina ho yung ganitong klaseng pamamaraan. And we will not tolerate that. In fact, in this proposal, meron din po mga provision dito na kung saan ay pwede po natin habulin yung mga pulis na nagpa-planting ng ebidensya, yung mga prosecutors o piskal na nagbabanggel ng kanilang mga kaso. Dahil nga po gusto nating paigtingin ito at hindi lamang ito limitado doon sa ating mga kababayan na nasa nandoon sa mababang estado sa buhay. Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Salamat, ginoong sponsor, Mr. Speaker. No? Again, while banggit ko kanina, maganda po ang inyong intensyon, but again, yung sinasabi po ninyong binibigyan natin ng dagdag lang na legal tools, no, ang ating mga law enforcement agency, based sa karanasan natin itong mga nakaraang panahon, ayun nga po ang problema. No? Kaya ang next ko na tanong, may problema ba talaga ang ating batas o ang problema ay nandoon sa nagpapatupad ng batas? Halimbawa, patungkol dito sa batas sa droga, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, kasi simula po nung naipasa po itong RA 9165 noong 2002 hanggang sa kasalukuyan ay wala pa ho talaga tayong nakukulong, nagpaparusahan at nakukonvict, no, ng mga sinasabing protectors, cuddlers, and even drug lords. Although there are possibly drug lords na nakakulong ngayon sa ating bilangguan, meron pa rin mga flaws o loopholes yung ating kasalukuyang batas na hanggang dun lamang po tayo. We cannot go beyond running after those people behind dito po sa mga nakakulong sa ating bilangguan, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. Kaya po, I do understand, gaya po ng nabanggit ko kanina, ang mga pangamba ng ating kasamahan, kaisa po ako ng ating kagalang-galang na Congressman Kaloy Zarate na hindi po sumasang-ayon na magkaroon ng extrajudicial killings o hindi kaya shortcut sa pagpapatupad o pagpapataw ng parusa sa mga sinasabing drug peddlers, drug users, and drug lords. Dahil ako'y naniniwala na meron pong batas na dapat sundin, lalong-lalot na ang ating mga law enforcement agencies or agents, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Salamat, ginoong sponsor. No? Again, just to reiterate, ang sa tingin ng kinatawang ito sa paglalagay ng napakaraming presumptions na ito. In fact, there is also a provision here, no, na kung magmukha ka lang addict, you are already presumed, no, na you violated the provisions of the bill, no. It will in fact institutionalizing profiling, no. Dahil nagmukha ka lang addict, this was also pointed out previously by the Honorable Belmonte, ay nalagay na ngayon sa alanganin ang iyong hindi lang seguridad, kung hindi ang iyong buhay, no? Dahil that presumption that you violated provisions of this proposed law will already apply, no? At again, gusto ko ring i-reiterate, no? Saan ba ang mas mahalaga? Yung mga presumption na ginawa nakalagay sa ating iba't ibang mga batas, o mas mataas ang level ng presumption na nakalagay sa ating saligang batas na sinasabi doon na ng lahat ng akusado ay presumed innocent, no, until proven guilty by a competent court, no. Pero dito dahan-dahan natin sa tingin ng kinatawang ito, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, dahan-dahang tinatapyas ito, no, ng iba't ibang batas na nalulusaw na yung presumption of innocence or ng isang individual na naakusahan ng paglabag, hindi lang dito sa kasong ito, no? Kung hindi sa iba't iba pang kaso. So, yun po ang isa sa ating ding pinangambahan, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Lalo't higit, we are shifting the burden, no, of proving the elements of a crime doon sa individual na naakusahan, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, unang-una, bilang tugon dun sa iyong katanungan kanina, ang isa pong tao ay hindi pwedeng basta-basta lamang pong akusahan bilang isang user, even if he manifests physical manifestations of being a drug user. Kasi po, ang pinaka-importante doon ay kailangan meron pong unlawful act o meron kayang apprehension na nangyari bago po sabihin na siya po ay possible user. For example, nahuli ho siya, no, for say possession, at immediately the police will definitely ask the accused o yung hinuli na mag-undergo ng isang drug test, no, for confirmation. And if he refuses, then he is presumed to be a user because hindi niya naribat yung presumption na user siya by simply undergoing a test. And if the test will prove that he is negative, then meron na siyang rebuttal kaagad doon, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. Doon naman po sa punto ng presumption of innocence, lahat po ng akusado dito sa panukalang ito ay still presumed to be innocent unless a contrary evidence is presented. In other words, ginagarantiya ho na itong panukalang batas na ito that the constitutional guarantee or presumption of innocence is guaranteed at hindi po pwedeng ma-violate. Presumptions will only arise if elements of the crime, no, or yung proven facts to be proven are proven beyond reasonable doubt, then it will give rise to a presumption, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Gusto ko lang linawin yung punto na yan. Ang ibig bang sabihin ng kagalang-galang na sponsor, the presumption will not apply if the so-called predicate action will not be proven through a trial na mali yun. Ganun ba yun?
Mr. Speaker, wala pa ho dun sa trial, no? Dun pa lang ho sa punto ng arrest, no? And if a person has violated any provision of this act, he will be presumed to have committed let's just say, for example, yung pagiging importer, no? May nahuling kargamento nasa pangalan ni Mr. A, at yung kargamentong yon ay upon inspection ay nakitang naglalaman ng 1 kilo of shabu. Now, it has to be proven first na yung shipment na ang may pagmamayari ay si Mr. A. Pangalawa, it has also to be proven that yung kargamento ay naglalaman ng shabu. Then, if these two elements are proven beyond reasonable doubt, then it can be presumed that Mr. A is an importer already, Mr. Speaker. I hope I was able to explain that clearly to the good gentleman, Congressman Zarate.
Thank you, Mr. Sponsor. Yun nga yung problema doon. No? Sabi po ninyo, it has to be proven first, yung mga elementong ito beyond reasonable doubt. Saan ho ang forum that it will be proven? Hindi po ba ang magde-decide lang dito ay yung mga law enforcement officials, no? Sabihin nila, na-prove, sa tingin ko, na-prove sa akin na yung kargamento na yan ay kay A. Pangalawa, na-prove din sa akin na yun ay shabu. Therefore, I conclude, no, based on my assumption, beyond reasonable doubt, that si A nga ang presumption will now apply. No? So yun po ang problema doon, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker. No?
Mr. Speaker,
it has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. At which forum? Doon sa at the time of the arrest, I don't think that is the forum that the proof beyond reasonable doubt is required. No? But pero sinabi ninyo, after itong dalawang elemento na ito will already be satisfied by the law enforcement official or agent, then mag-a-apply na yung presumption na si Mr. A is the importer of that illegal drugs, no? Tingin ko po may sablay doon at may problema, gaya ng nabanggit kanina ng kagalang-galang na Representative Suntay, no? Ay sino po namang tao na mag-i-import ng illegal drugs na ilagay niya sa kanyang pangalan, no? And it's very easy for some individuals, no, na gamitin halimbawa ang pangalan ni Mr. A, ilagay niya doon, Mr. A, pinadeliver sa isang particular na address, no? Granting that it can be proven that that is the address of Mr. A. Second, that yung dineliver doon ay talagang drugs, illegal drugs. Ibig ba sabihin na si Mr. A na kaagad? Because ang nag-import noon because of this particular presumption, now the burden shift to Mr. A to prove otherwise. Ganun po ba ang ibig natin sabihin, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, hindi ho nag-shift yung burden of proof kasi it still remains with the prosecution. Yung sinasabi ko po that elements that has to be proven, yung facts to be proven before the presumption of Mr. A being the importer of illegal drugs will come into play. Nasa prosecution ho yan. Bago ho i-file ng piskal yung kaso that si Mr. A ay importer, lalabas ho doon muna yung mga elements that or facts to be proven and must be proven beyond reasonable doubt, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. But presumption of Mr. A being the importer does not presume that he is already guilty. Now, burden of evidence is on him and he must present this as his defense, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. So, yung presumption ho arose after several facts are proven and Mr. A became presumed to be the importer. Yun po yung example na nabanggit ko po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. And presumption does not mean guilt. Still, at the end of the day, it is still the courts that will determine the guilt of the accused or the innocence of the accused, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague.
Salamat sa kasagutan, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Again, doon nga po yung may problema no? Kasi kahit na sinabi na kagalang-galang na sponsor na hindi naman nag-shift yung burden of proof, no? Dahil presumed innocent pa rin. Dahil anyway, ang fiscal lang naman ang nag-rule niyan. But remember, magkaiba ho ang degree or level of quantum of evidence sa fiscal, sa level ng fiscal at pagdating sa korte. But, no, dahil sa ipinanukalang susog na ito or amendment, ang akusado na ngayon, si Mr. A na, pagdating sa korte, ang may burden. Nasasabihin niya, hindi sa akin yan. No? Instead of that burden, nandoon sa prosecution. No? Remember, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Sponsor, si Mr. A is an individual, no? Na pinaratangan ng Estado. At ang kalaban niya rito ay hindi lang si Piskal, kundi ang buong makinarya ng Estado, ng pamahalaan. Pero ngayon, siya na yung may burden ngayon na magpapatunay. Inalis na ito sa prosecution. So instead of the prosecution introducing additional evidence other than the name of Mr. A appearing on a particular piece of paper, and other than the evidence that the alleged material being imported is illegal and drugs, wala na, tapos na ang burden nila. Si A na kaagad ang may burden na sabing hindi kanya yan. So this is what, ito yung problematic dito, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, no? Dahil masyado nating pinalabnaw na natin, no? Of course, I understand, no? I understand totally na kailangan talagang supili natin itong problema ng droga doon sa pinakaugat, no? Like itong mga importer, mga producer, no? Manufacturer. But sa ginagawa nating pag-amyandang ito, binibigyan natin ng puwang muli, no? Na andyan yung oportunidad na talagang ma-violate ang karapatan ng mga mamamayan natin, no? Dahil binibigyan natin ng napakalawak na kapangyarihan ang mga law enforcement agencies to determine who will be arrested, whose individual will be prosecuted, no? By applying this additional legal tool, no? Na meron silang mga presumptions other than the presumption of regularity that already is in their possession. Ngayon, binibigyan pa natin sila ng dagdag na kapangyarihan. So yung doon ako nangangamba, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, especially looking at the record, no, of how this campaign against drugs is being implemented as we speak now, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yung pangamba po natin na nababiolate na mga law enforcers yung presumption of regularity in the conduct of the arrest, mukhang hindi po talaga mawawala yun. No? There will always be cases where this will be perhaps happening, or maybe perhaps imagined, or maybe perhaps presumed. So, sa aking paniwala, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, yung sa punto ho na sinite ko kanina, yung kay Mr. A, what if, just for purposes of maybe expanding our knowledge on this issue. What if, for instance, si Mr. A talaga ay smuggler ng droga? This particular example, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, how can we now prosecute Mr. A for that matter? If the same circumstances are present, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague. I'm just saying or just citing that as an example because if indeed we want to strengthen or paigtingin itong kampanya and really run after itong malalaking tao sa likod ng sindikato ng droga, paano ho natin gagawin yon kung hindi po natin mabibigyan ng additional legal tools just like the legal and disputable presumptions that we are proposing, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to ask the good gentleman, maybe he can educate this representation as to what if si Mr. A talaga ay yung smuggler. Ano pong recourse natin, ano pong course of action natin dyan, Mr. Speaker?
Again, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, ako'y naniniwala if Mr. A is a real smuggler, it cannot be that problem, will not be cured by just inserting this presumption in the present law. That requires the imagination of our law enforcement agencies, Hindi naman siguro sila nagkulang ng budget, hindi sila nagkulang ng other tools, As I've mentioned earlier, Mr. Chair, Mr. Sponsor, and Mr. Speaker, buong makinarya ng Estado ay nasa prosecution. Hindi lang ito ang kapulisan at marami pang iba. Pero sa nag-iisang si Mr. A na kagyat, naka-attach sa kanya yung presumption dahil merong nakitang resibo, nandun ang pangalan niya, at yung imported na produkto ay napatunayang isang illegal na droga, immediately nag-attach yung presumption na siya nga yung importer kaagad. Tumigil na sa pag-produce ng other evidence ang pulis. Linking him, if indeed he is a smuggler or a protector or whatever is that. Kasi hindi ang pagkakaintindi ko, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, if you are really a drug protector, a drug lord, hindi lang ito one-time operation. It requires a long period of operation, surveillance by the law enforcement agencies, by getting forensic evidence, by getting witnesses. But I presume now, ayaw na nang gawin ito ng mga ating mga kapulisan at gusto nila i-shortcut yung process by simply inserting this in the current law that you are already presumed, shifting the burden. Hindi ho totoo yun na walang pag-shift ng burden dahil this is of course this is a disputable presumption, but during the trial nasa akusado na po ang responsibilidad at ang bigat na patunayan na siya ay inosente. Sa halip na ang burden na yan ay nasa prosecution na patunayan siya na siya ay may sala. Now, kung isang mahirap lang yan, at hindi siya mabigyan ng karampatang ng tamang representasyon sa korte at hindi niya na-dispute yung presumption na yan, patay kang bata ka. Kulong ka na because you failed to dispute that presumption na nakalagay na sa batas, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker. So yun lang po, yun ho ang gusto kong ma-erase na punto, dahil hindi ho ako naniniwala na walang shifting of the burden, So yun po ang point ko kanina nung sinasabi ko na dahan-dahan nating tinatapyas yung presumption of innocence, dito sa ating na ginagarantiyahan ng ating saligang batas by inserting these provisions. So, at any rate, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, siguro lang mga huling punto ko na lang po, dahil nabanggit na pag-usapan na rin ito ng mga nakaraang mga interpellators. Doon ho sa, siguro by way of question and manifestation, dito rin po sa, i-reiterate ko lang din yung usapin kanina, no, na sa Section 11, where na meron pong pag-introduce muli, no, noong parusang kamatayan, no, dahil gusto nating baguhin yung provision ng Section 11 na instead of just saying maximum penalty, ay gusto nating idagdag doon, no, idagdag na natin yung phrase na life imprisonment to death, no? At ako, tama yung po ang sinabi ni Deputy Speaker, no? Ako'y naniniwala and I subscribe to that. Sa sinabi ni Deputy Speaker Rufus Rodriguez, no? Na ito talaga ay reintroduction ng death penalty, no? Dahil doon nga po sa, while it is true that under RA 9165, ang range ng penalty doon ay hanggang maximum is death penalty. And but in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, no, RA 9346 malinaw na the imposition of death penalty is already prohibited, no. So this insertion is a indirect way of amending that particular provision of RA 9346, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker, no. So while you are saying that kinaklaro mo lang yung ng ating kagalang-galang na sponsor kung ano yung maximum penalty, precisely that maximum penalty na nandoon nga sa RA 9165 was already amended by a later law in 2006, no, yung RA 9346, Mr. Sponsor, Mr. Speaker.
Tama po, Mr. Speaker, distinguished colleague, gaya po ng pagkakabanggit ni Deputy Speaker Rufus Rodriguez earlier in his interpellation, in the same manner that the good gentleman, Congressman Zarate, has also mentioned, I would, at the appropriate time, I would accept, no, any amendment that the good gentleman from Bayan Muna will introduce, no, in the same manner that I will accept any proposal that will be forwarded by Deputy Speaker Rufus Rodriguez with respect to Section 11 as to the penal provision of this section, Mr. Speaker, at the appropriate time.
So maraming salamat, Ginoong Sponsor, Mr. Speaker. Yun lang po ang mga ilang paglilinaw natin sa panukalang batas na ito, and as a final note, I have to manifest that I have already written, no, the Committee on Rules of my intention to withdraw as sponsor, no, co-author of the bill in consideration, no, dahil doon sa mga, while meron tayong naka-consolidate na bill dito, but napakarami pong mga provision, no, na sa tingin ng kinatawang ito will not advance our advocacy for protection and defense of human rights, at kailangang mag-withdraw ang kinatawang ito as co-author ng substituted bill, no, that is now in consideration sa floor. So maraming salamat, Ginoong Sponsor, maraming salamat, Ginoong Speaker. Magandang gabi po sa ating lahat.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Speaker. But before, I'd like to just state again for the record that I respect the decision of the good gentleman from Bayan Muna in his intention to withdraw as the co-author of the said bill, no, for reasons which he stated in his statement. I do would definitely agree to whatever protection of human rights that the good gentleman from Bayan Muna will propose in the period of amendments or at the appropriate time when we come to that, Mr. Speaker. Again, I respect and I thank the good gentleman from Bayan Muna, Congressman Kaloy Zarate.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Sponsor. No? Yes, at the proper time, even if we already withdrew our sponsorship, we will introduce some amendments to the bill in consideration. Maraming salamat po at magandang gabi muli.
Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 7814.
Is there any objection? The chair is none. The motion is approved. Majority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move that we suspend session for tomorrow, February 17, 2021 at 3 p.m.
Is there any objection? The chair is none. The motion is approved. Session suspended till February 17 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Tawag ka?